A story we set out to report 6 months ago has now turned into two stories: how cigarettes can destroy people's lives, and how one cigarette company is trying to destroy the reputation of a man who refused to keep quiet about what he says he learned when he worked for them. The company is Brown & Williamson, America's third largest tobacco company. The man they've set out to destroy is Dr. Jeffrey Wigand, their former $300,000 a year director of research. They employed prestigious law firms to sue him, a high-powered investigation firm to probe every nook and cranny of his life. And they hired a big-time public relations consultant to help them plant damaging stories about him in the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and others. But the Journal reported the story for what they thought it was. Scant evidence was just one of their comments. CBS management wouldn't let us broadcast our original story and our interview with Jeffrey Wigand because they were worried about the possibility of a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit against us for tortious interference. That is, interfering with Wigand's confidentiality agreement with Brown & Williamson. But now things have changed. Last week, the Wall Street Journal got hold of and published a confidential deposition Wigand gave in a Mississippi case, a November deposition that repeated many of the charges he made to us last August. And while a lawsuit is still a possibility, not putting Jeffrey Wigand's story on 60 Minutes no longer is. What Dr. Wigand told us in that original interview was that his former colleagues, executives of Brown & Williamson Tobacco, knew all along that their tobacco products, their cigarettes and pipe tobacco, contained additives that increased the danger of disease. And further, that they had long known that the nicotine in tobacco is an addictive drug, despite their public statements to the contrary, like the testimony before Congress of Dr. Wigand's former boss, B&W Chief Executive Officer Thomas Sandifer.
I believe that nicotine is not addictive.
I believe he perjured himself because I watched those testimonies very carefully.
All of us did. There was the whole line of people, the whole line of CEOs up there, all swearing that...
And part of the reason I'm here is I felt that their representation clearly, at least within Brown & Williamson's representation, clearly misstated what they commonly knew as language within the company. You know, we're in a nicotine delivery business.
And that's what cigarettes are for.
Most certainly. It's a delivery device for nicotine.
A delivery device for nicotine. Put it in your mouth, light it up, and you're going to get your fix.
You get your fix.
Dr. Wigand says that Brown & Williamson manipulates and adjusts that nicotine fix not by artificially adding nicotine, but by enhancing the effect of the nicotine through the use of chemical additives like ammonia. This process is known in the tobacco industry as impact boosting.
While not spiking nicotine, they clearly manipulate it.
The process is described in Brown & Williamson's Leaf Blender's Manual and in other B&W documents.
There's extensive use of this technology, which is called ammonia chemistry, that allows for nicotine to be more rapidly absorbed in the lungs and therefore affect the brain and central nervous system.
And then there are these documents, thousands of pages of confidential scientific reports and legal memoranda from B&W's secret files, which experts say support Dr. Wigand's claim that Brown & Williamson's executives have had strong reason to believe all along that nicotine is addictive and that their tobacco products cause cancer and other diseases. Most of these documents had been locked away in B&W's lawyers' confidential files in Louisville, Kentucky, until this man, a paralegal in that law office, Merrill Williams, walked off with them. The documents found their way to Dr. Stanton Glantz, a professor of medicine at the University of California Medical Center in San Francisco. It was Dr. Glantz and a team of scientists from the university who wrote about the documents this past summer in a series of articles in the Journal of the American Medical Association. What is the story that the documents told you?
They told me that 30 years ago, Brown & Williamson and British American Tobacco, its parent, knew nicotine was an addictive drug, and they knew smoking caused cancer and other diseases.
And Dr. Glantz says these documents reveal how Brown & Williamson was keeping that knowledge from the public.
And they also developed very sophisticated legal strategies to keep this information away from the public, to keep this information away from public health authorities.
Dr. Wigand said that a cigarette is basically a nicotine delivery instrument. That's what it's really all about.
Yes, absolutely. And in the documents, they say that over and over and over again.
and finding a way to deliver that nicotine to the smoker's brain without exposing smokers to disease-causing pollutants like tar that come with tobacco smoke is one reason, says Dr. Wigand, that he was hired by B&W on January 1st, 1989.
They were looking to reduce the hazards within cigarette, reduce the carcinogenic components or listed carcinogens that were within the tobacco products.
They talked about carcinogens, too?
They talked about carcinogens.
They talked about cancer and heart disease and emphysema and all of those things, and they were going to work toward making a safer cigarette? You must have been very excited.
I was enthusiastic and energetic in terms of pursuing that.
Dr. Jeffrey Wigand, with a doctorate in biochemistry, had spent nearly 20 years working in the healthcare and biotechnology industries. He says his goal at B&W was to make a cigarette that would be less likely to cause disease.
People will continue to smoke no matter what kind of regulations. If you can provide for those who are smoking and who need to smoke something that produces less risk for them, I thought I was going to be making a difference.
Brown and Williamson made Jeff Wigand vice president for R&D, paying him more than $300,000 a year in salary and perks.
And I was very inquisitive when I came on. Have you ever done any nicotine studies? Have you done any pharmacology studies? Have you done any biological studies? Have you looked at the effect of nicotine on the central nervous system? And always, in general, categorically, no, we don't do that kind of work.
But according to those thousands of pages from B&W and its parent British American Tobacco's confidential files, the company had in fact done exactly those kinds of studies. Dr. Wigand says he did not suspect there was anything wrong until he attended a meeting of scientists who worked for British American tobacco companies from around the world. Dr. Wigand says that his colleagues talked about working together to develop a safer, a less hazardous cigarette, a cigarette less likely to cause disease. But when it came time to write up their ideas, to create a documentary record of their discussion, B&W's lawyers intervened.
The minutes that came in were roughly about 18 pages long. I knew what was in the content. They were rewritten by Kendrick Wells.
Who's he?
Kendrick Wells was one of the staff attorneys at B&W.
And he rewrote the minutes of the meeting?
He rewrote the minutes of the meeting. He edited out the discussions on safer cigarette and basically toned the meeting down.
You're saying that one of the staff attorneys for B&W here in the United States, whose name was?
Kendrick Wells.
An attorney, rewrote the minutes of this research meeting with all of the research heads of VAT Industries.
That is correct.
In order to sanitize it, in a sense.
Sanitize it as well as reduce any type of exposure associated with discussing a safer cigarette. When you say you have a safer cigarette, that now takes everything else that you have available and say it's unsafe, and that from a product's liability point of view gave the lawyers great concern.
Kendrick Wells, the lawyer Dr. Wigand says deleted materials from the minutes of the scientific meeting, is now the Assistant General Counsel of B&W. Why would B&W lawyers like Kendrick Wells be so concerned? According to B&W's own confidential files, any evidence, any documents that show any B&W tobacco product, like Cools or Viceroy's, might be unsafe, those documents would have to be produced in court as part of any lawsuit filed by a smoker or his surviving family. And according to the lawyers, those documents could be disastrous for B&W. So the lawyers took over.
The lawyers intervened, and then they purged documents every time there was reference to a word less hazardous or safer.
But Dr. Wigand says the lawyers' interference, their editing and review of his reports, did not stop him.
And I started asking more probing questions, and I started digging deeper and deeper. As I dug deeper and deeper, I started getting a bodyguard.
What do you mean, bodyguard?
I went to a meeting. I now was accompanied by a lawyer. My bodyguard was Kendrick Wells.
Frustrated by the lawyer's intervention and presence at major scientific meetings, Dr. Wigand says he took his complaints to Thomas Sandifer, then the president of B&W. What did he say to you?
I don't want to hear any more discussion about a safer cigarette.
And he says Thomas Sandifer went on to tell him,
we pursue a safer cigarette, it would put us at extreme exposure with every other product. I don't want to hear about it anymore.
all the people who were dying from cigarettes.
Essentially, yes.
Cancer,
cancer,
Heart disease, things of that nature.
emphysema.
Lawyers representing B&W and Thomas Sandifer have said that all this, as well as other accounts of conversations with Thomas Sandifer, are absolutely false. We asked Dr. Wigand what his reaction was to what he says was Sandifer's decision to abandon the safer cigarette.
I would say I got angry.
He was your boss.
I bit my tongue. I had just transitioned from one company to another. I was paid well, it was comfortable, and for me to do anything precipitous would put my family at risk.
You were happy to take down the $300,000 a year.
I essentially, took the money. I did my job.
So Dr. Wigand abandoned his idea of trying to develop a new and safer cigarette. He turned his attention to investigating the additives, the flavorings, the other compounds in B&W tobacco products. Many, like glycerol, which is used to keep the tobacco in cigarettes moist, are normally harmless. But when glycerol is burned in a cigarette, its chemistry changes.
Glycerol, when it's burnt, forms a very specific substance called acrolein.
According to the American Council on Science and Health, acrolein, or acrolein, is extremely irritating and has been shown to interfere with the normal clearing of the lungs. Recent research shows that acrolein acts like a carcinogen, though not yet classified as such. And Dr. Wigand says that B&W continues to add glycerol to their products. But it was another additive that Dr. Wigand says led to the end of his career at B&W.
The straw that broke the camel's back for me and really put me in trouble with Sandifer was a compound called coumarin.
Coumarin is a flavoring that provides a sweet taste to tobacco products, but is known to cause tumors in the livers of mice. It was removed from B&W cigarettes, but according to these documents, B&W continued to use it in its Sir Walter Raleigh aromatic pipe tobacco until at least 1992.
And when I came on board at B&W, they had tried to transition from coumarin to another similar flavor that would give the same taste, and it was unsuccessful.
Dr. Wigand says the news about coumarin and cancer got worse. This report, by independent researchers, part of a national toxic safety program, presented evidence that coumarin is a carcinogen that causes various cancers.
I wanted it out immediately, and I was told that it would affect sales, and I was to mind my own business. And I constructed a memo to Mr. Sandifer indicating that I could not in conscience continue with coumarin, a product that we now normally have documentation that is lung-specific carcinogen.
Right. Sent the document forward to Sandifer.
I sent a document forward to Sandifer. I was told that we would continue working on a substitute, and we weren't going to remove it because it would impact sales, and that was his decision.
In other words, what you're charging Sandifer with, and Brown and Williamson with, is ignoring health considerations consciously.
Most certainly.
After his confrontations over coumarin, Dr. Wigand says he was not surprised when on March the 24th, 1993, Thomas Sandifer, newly promoted to Chief Executive Officer, CEO of B&W, had him fired. And the reason for firing that he gave you?
Poor communication skills, just not cutting it, poor performance.
When Dr. Wigand, who has a wife and 2 young daughters, was fired by Brown and Williamson Tobacco, his contract provided severance pay and critical health benefits for his family. Critical because one of his children requires expensive daily health care. Several months after he was fired, B&W decided to sue their former head of R&D, and they cut off his severance and those vital health benefits.
They said I violated my confidentiality agreement by discussing my severance package.
Lucretia Wigand says that the firing and B&W's suspension of benefits was devastating.
We almost lost our family as a unit. Jeff and I almost separated.
Why?
Because he was under so much stress and so much pressure that it was something that we needed help dealing with. We went to counseling, and we've worked through it.
And this was, you think, triggered by the business with B&W?
Yes, I know it was.
B&W settled that lawsuit we mentioned and reinstated those critical health benefits only after Dr. Wigand agreed to sign a new, stricter, lifelong confidentiality agreement. Nonetheless, word of Dr. Wigand's battles with Brown and Williamson attracted attention in Washington, where in the spring of 1994, a Democratic Congress and the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, were investigating the tobacco industry. Dr. Wigand was contacted by their investigators, and after notifying Brown and Williamson, he talked with those investigators. Shortly afterward, he was stunned by a couple of anonymous telephone calls.
And in April 1994, on 2 separate occasions, I had life threats on my kids.
What?
We had life threats on my kids.
Dr. Wigand told us he doesn't know where they came from, but that, understandably, they frightened him. He described the threats by referring to his diary.
A male voice that was on the phone that said, "Don't mess with tobacco anymore. How are your kids?" Then on April 28th, around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, relatively the same voice says, "Leave tobacco alone or else you'll find your kids hurt. They're pretty girls now." So, I got scared. I started carrying a gun.
Really?
Yep, started carrying a handgun.
Someone called and threatened to kill him and to hurt the family if he messed with the tobacco industry.
That was last August. Now, in February, Lucretia Wigand has filed for divorce, citing spousal abuse. Just one of the accusations Brown and Williamson is using in their full-throated campaign to discredit Jeffrey Wigand. That report when we return. Today, 3 years after he was fired by Brown and Williamson, Dr. Jeffrey Wigand is the star witness in a U.S. Justice Department criminal investigation into the tobacco industry, which includes the question of whether B&W's former CEO lied to the U.S. Congress when he said that he believed that nicotine was not addictive. But Dr. Wigand is paying a heavy price for his decision to testify, as well as for breaking his confidentiality agreement by talking to us. His family life has been shattered. His reputation has been tarnished because of B&W's massive campaign designed to silence him and to discredit this former research chief turned whistleblower. They're trying to do what they can to paint you as irresponsible, a liar.
Well, I think the word they've used, Mike, is a master of deceit.
You wish you hadn't come forward? You wish you hadn't blown the whistle?
There are times I wish I hadn't done it, but there are times that I feel compelled to do it. If you ask me if I would do it again, or do I think it's worth it? Yeah, I think it's worth it. I think in the end, people will see the truth.
Well, these 3 men have seen the same truth as Wigand. They are the state attorneys general of Florida, Minnesota, and Mississippi, where Dr. Wigand is testifying in a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit against the tobacco industry. Mike Moore is Attorney General of Mississippi.
Jeffrey's testimony is going to be devastating, Mike, to the tobacco industry. So devastating that I fear for his life. I think...
You serious?
I'm very serious. The information that Jeffrey has, I think, is the most important information that has ever come out against the tobacco industry. This industry, in my opinion, is an industry who has perpetrated the biggest fraud on the American public in history. They have lied to the American public for years and years. They have killed millions and millions of people and made a profit on it. So I hope that they won't continue to lie and try to destroy Jeffrey like they destroyed the other lives of people all over this country.
The campaign to destroy Dr. Jeffrey Wigand began over 2 months ago in the midst of a media frenzy over our failure to broadcast our August interview with him. Brown and Williamson sued Dr. Wigand for talking to us despite his confidentiality agreement, and they got a court order in Kentucky to try to silence him from speaking out further. Then investigators hired by B&W fanned out across the country looking for anything they could use to discredit the whistleblower.
They've been going around to my family, my friends, digging up and digging here and digging there.
Then there are lawyers, and B&W has a half dozen major firms working on the Jeff Wigand case. Their lawyers compiled the results of their nationwide dragnet into a summary that alleges that in recent years, Dr. Wigand pled guilty to everything from wife beating to shoplifting. Beyond that, they charged him with a multitude of sins, from fudging his resume to making a false claim 3 years ago for $95.20 for dry cleaning. Then Brown and Williamson retained John Scanlon to get their story to the media. Scanlon is a fixture of the New York media scene who has close personal relationships with print and television reporters and producers, as well as editors and publishers. We asked him to sit down and discuss the charges he has been circulating to me and other reporters, but he declined. But Scanlon did make this statement to a CBS News camera crew.
He's running from cross-examination. His victims have decided to respond and present evidence that he is in fact a habitual liar.
The smear campaign has been very systematic, very organized, very well done.
My background is I have a PhD in biochemistry.
Today, Dr. Wigand is a $30,000 a year science teacher at a Louisville, Kentucky public high school. And his students, his faculty colleagues, and his family were stunned last month when a Louisville television station broadcast some of Brown and Williamson's accusations.
Court records show Wigand was charged with theft by unlawful taking and shoplifting.
Then the Brown and Williamson 500-page dossier on Wigand was given to the Wall Street Journal, who investigated the charges. And last Thursday, in this front-page story, the Journal reported that, quote, a close look at the file and independent research by this newspaper into its key claims indicates that many of the serious allegations against Dr. Wigand are backed by scanty or contradictory evidence. And they continued, quote, some of the charges, including that he pleaded guilty to shoplifting, are demonstrably untrue. We put that Journal statement to Gordon Smith, an attorney designated by Brown and Williamson to talk to us. The Wall Street Journal went through all of that material. It says that what the dossier that you put together, scant evidence.
Mr. Wallace, that's dead wrong. There's not scant evidence. The Wall Street Journal did not go over the scores, literally scores of untruths told by Jeff Wigand that we showed to them.
And Gordon Smith went on at some length to say that Wigand's life, quote, is a pattern of lies. I don't understand, frankly, Mr. Smith. I really don't understand. Brown and Williamson must be in a panic if they're going after this man as hard as you are.
You're wrong. There are no material inaccuracies in that book. None whatsoever.
But not included in that dossier were Brown and Williamson's own personnel records, which showed that Wigand had received good performance appraisals for the first 3 years from B&W. In his fourth year, however, those appraisals turned sour. But despite that, even after he was fired, he received this letter from Brown and Williamson's personnel director. To whom it may concern, Dr. Jeffrey Wigand was instrumental in the development of new products, as well as the major impetus behind a significant upgrade in our R&D technical capabilities, both in terms of people and equipment. During his tenure at Brown and Williamson, Dr. Wigand demonstrated a high level of technical knowledge and expertise. And this is on your own stationery, your own man saying bad about him.
Mike, Brown and Williamson refused to be a reference for Jeff Wigand after he left. This letter was negotiated with his attorney, and it was the only statement Brown and Williamson would ever make about him because Brown and Williamson did not want to be a reference for Jeff Wigand.
And Mr. Smith had this to say about our relationship with Jeffrey Wigand.
You're being led along by a guy who's not believable. You're getting half the story. Well, you've got a vested interest in making this man credible.
Why do we have a
CBS has paid this guy $12,000.
For what?
I believe for consulting.
Now wait just a moment. Let's get this straight. Paid him $12,000 for what?
To consult on a story for CBS.
For the record, as we explained to Mr. Smith, 60 Minutes did in fact hire Dr. Wigand 2 years ago to act as our expert consultant to analyze nearly 1,000 pages of technical documents leaked to us not from Brown and Williamson, but from inside Philip Morris, another tobacco company. At that time, Dr. Wigand told us he would not talk with us about Brown and Williamson, and he did not. until over a year later.
I felt an obligation to tell the truth. There were things I saw, there were things I learned, there was things I observed that I felt that needed to be told. The focus continues to be on what I would call systematic and aggressive tactics to undermine my credibility and some of my personal life.
But you expected that, didn't you?
Well, I didn't expect to the extent that it's happened, okay? It's disrupted not only my life, I'm in divorce proceedings now.
These three state attorneys general say that no matter what B&W's accusations are, they remain convinced that what Wigand has to say about the tobacco industry in general and Brown and Williamson in particular is thoroughly credible. And they are suing the tobacco industry for the billions of dollars in state Medicaid costs their states have paid to treat people who have become ill from smoking. Minnesota Attorney General Hubert Humphrey III.
We want to see the full truth come out. We want the deception and fraud and the violations of our state laws stopped. And we want people that are making the money on this product to bear the full cost of the health care burden that is there.
Bob Butterworth is the Attorney General of Florida.
The issue has been deceit.
Deceit.
Pure and simple deceit. The cigarette companies made a decision that they would withhold valuable information from the American public, information that the consumer would need to make an intelligent decision as to whether or not they wish to smoke or not to smoke.
Again, Mississippi Attorney General Mike Moore.
I'm used to dealing with cocaine dealers and crack dealers, and I have never seen damage done like the tobacco company has done. There's no comparison. Cocaine kills 10, 15,000 people a year in this country. Tobacco kills 425,000 people a year.
Mike, it's absurd to suggest that tobacco is any way like cocaine in terms of addiction. It's absolutely absurd to suggest that. Brown & Williamson makes a lawful product. They sell it and make it in a lawful way.
Well, then why do 425,000 people die every year, according to all medical and scientific evaluations, die of smoking cigarettes? Why?
Mike, 50 million people choose to use tobacco and smoke.
So, on a cost-benefit ratio, it's only 425,000 people who die out of the 50 million.
No, Mike.
That's a small fraction? Is that the point you're making?
No, Mike, not at all. People choose to smoke. People choose to stop smoking. I think you used to smoke and you chose to stop smoking.
That's right.
It's their choice. It's a lawful product. It's marketed and manufactured lawfully.
B&W has questioned Dr. Wigand's character, but he says that's just a smokescreen, and he has some questions for Brown & Williamson.
Why don't they deal with the issue whether they can develop a safer cigarette? Why don't they deal with the issue of using and knowingly using additives that are known to be carcinogenic in order not to influence sales? Why don't we deal with that issue?
Brown & Williamson did answer some of Dr. Jeffrey Wigand's questions for us. They told us they have removed coumarin, that's carcinogenic flavoring, from their Sir Walter Raleigh aromatic pipe tobacco, but they insist it never posed a health risk to smokers. B&W lawyer Kendrick Wells declined to talk to us, but he did deny in testimony last week Dr. Wigand's charge that he had altered the minutes of that scientific meeting. And B&W says the truth will come out in the end when they get a chance to cross-examine Dr. Wigand under oath. And they insist that we, CBS, cannot report on this story objectively since we are indemnifying Dr. Wigand in B&W's lawsuit against him. 2 months ago, CBS agreed to do that after a leak resulted in the disclosure of Dr. Wigand's identity before he was prepared to go public. Though still unaware of where that leak had come from, CBS decided to take financial responsibility for the impact that leak had on Dr. Wigand because it exposed him to a lawsuit by Brown & Williamson. A footnote. This banner headline yesterday in the Louisville Courier-Journal, B&W's hometown newspaper, about charges their employers had engaged in smuggling and bribes in Louisiana. In that story, the U.S. Attorney in New Orleans says, look for some indictments in the very near future.
Most of you watching tonight have probably flown on an airplane made by the Boeing company. That's why you may have been more than a little rattled when a panel blew off the side of one of its airplanes in January, leaving a gaping hole and a lot of questions for the renowned American company. Since then, 4 federal investigations have been launched, and Boeing hired a new CEO to, quote, restore trust. But that hasn't stopped a steady stream of Boeing whistleblowers from coming forward. The FAA says over the last year, it's received more than 200 reports from whistleblowers. Their safety concerns include mismanagement of parts, poor manufacturing, and sloppy inspections at Boeing. You're about to hear from some of those whistleblowers. They told us why they weren't surprised when a Boeing airplane blew open in the Oregon sky.
Yes, we are emergency. We are depressurized.
This was the view from the cabin thousands of feet above Portland. For 14 terrifying minutes, nothing stood between the 177 people on the Alaska Airlines flight and the cold evening sky.
We do need to return back to, we have 177 passengers.
The distress call came shortly after takeoff when a panel over an exit that's only open for maintenance, called a door plug, blew off 3 miles above the ground.
Emergency aircraft are now leveling 12,000.
The plane, a Boeing 737-9 MAX, just a few months old, landed safely, and remarkably, no one was seriously injured. A month later, the National Transportation Safety Board's investigation revealed 4 bolts required to secure the MAX's door plug were removed during production at Boeing's factory in Renton, Washington, and never reinstalled. Boeing says it can't find any paperwork to explain how a plane left the factory broken. Sam Mohawk works at that Renton factory. This is his first television interview.
So, in January, when you heard about the lost door plug incident, what was your reaction?
I was not surprised. I was almost expecting something to happen. I was actually happy that it wasn't a catastrophic event that took down an airplane. That kind of put visibility, what was going on internally, out to the public.
Mohawk has worked for Boeing for 13 years on 3 different airplane programs. Months before the door plug incident, Mohawk says he warned Boeing and federal regulators about lapses in safety practices inside the Renton factory, which makes about 30% of the world's commercial jet fleet.
The idea is to keep those airplanes moving, keep that line moving at all costs.
At all costs, even safety?
Unfortunately, yes. Yeah.
Mohawk says he started noticing problems during COVID when Boeing was ramping up production and dealing with supply chain issues. Part of his job as a quality investigator is keeping track of defective airplane parts in what employees call, quote, the parts jail.
Why parts jail?
Because they're supposed to be under lock and key, and it's supposed to be like a chain of evidence. We're following that whole part to make sure that that is not a bad part going back to the airplane.
But Mohawk says in an effort to keep production moving, some Boeing employees sidestepped protocol and took bad parts out of the parts jail when his team wasn't looking.
Where do you think the parts are going?
There's so much chaos in that factory that there's a desperation for parts because we have problems with our part suppliers. So there's, in order to get the plane built and out the door in time, I think unfortunately some of those parts were recycled back onto the airplanes in order to keep building the airplane and not stop it in production.
You think that the faulty parts could be on Boeing airplanes?
Yes, I do, yeah.
Are you talking about a couple bad parts being put on a plane, or is this happening repeatedly?
I think it's happening repeatedly. We have thousands of missing parts.
And it's not just bolts, but rudders, one of the primary tools for steering an airplane. Mohawk says 42 flawed or non-conforming rudders that he says would likely not last the 30-year lifespan of a jet went missing.
Those parts came into our system. They're huge parts, and they just completely went missing. Somebody, not through our group, moved all those parts away.
If they're using non-conforming parts and they're putting them on airplanes, what's the concern?
I think without a proper investigation, it could lead to a catastrophic event. It might not happen within the first year, but down the road, they're not going to last the lifetime that they're expected to last. It's like Russian roulette, you don't know if it's going to go down or not.
Sam Mohawk's story echoes another Boeing whistleblower at another Boeing plant, John Barnett. He appeared on NBC's Today Show in 2019.
From day one, it's just all been about schedule and hurry up and just get it done, push the planes out, we're behind schedule.
John Barnett spent 3 decades at Boeing. In 2010, he began working as a quality manager on the long-haul 787 Dreamliner at the company's South Carolina factory. Barnett said managers there pressured workers to ignore FAA regulations, such as not tracking defective parts properly, then retaliated against him for speaking up, claims Boeing denies. In 2017, he retired and reached out to Rob Turkowitz, a Charleston attorney who's worked with dozens of Boeing employees over the last decade.
John Barnett walked into my office and told me about what was going on. And I asked him, I said, do you have documents? And he said, actually, I do. He said, I've got thousands of documents.
Turkowitz says Barnett had more than 3,000 internal documents, emails, and photos from Boeing to support his whistleblower claim. 7 years later, John Barnett was in the final stretch of his case.
I think that John Barnett was probably the best witness I've ever seen testify. He knew the facts up and down, and the defense lawyer objected and said, he's not even looking at the documents. And if I remember right, John said, I don't need to. I live this.
He knew every detail of his case.
Absolutely.
John Barnett was scheduled to complete his final day of depositions on March 9th of this year.
And I tried calling John to see if he needed a ride and, let him know I could pick him up at the hotel. And I got no answer. And when I got to the deposition at about 10 o'clock, he didn't show up.
He drove to John Barnett's hotel and learned the 62-year-old was dead inside his truck with what police said was a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Turkowitz called John Barnett's family, brothers Rodney, Robbie, Michael, and Mom Vicky.
He was used to people caring and listening. If something was wrong, they fixed it. And when he started in Charleston, that wasn't the case. And he would try to go to his boss, who would not listen. And I guess that's when he felt under siege, He would be embarrassed at meetings.
What did the fight do to him?
He put up a good front with us, but at times when we really had heart-to-heart conversations, you could tell it just wore on him. I'd ask him, why do you just keep pursuing it? And he just because it's the right thing to do. Who else is going to do it?
The Barnett family is continuing John's legal fight. His death inspired other Boeing workers to speak up. One of them is Merle Myers. He worked with John Barnett years ago.
When the stories came out about how he was treated by managers, some of whom I knew, I was really angry. And he was just a really solid airplane man.
Myers began his 30-year career at Boeing as a parts inspector. He was working as a quality manager at the company's largest plant in Everett, Washington, before he left last year. He says his concerns first began in 2015, after he discovered defective 787 landing gear axles that had been scrapped were taken by workers and brought back to the factory.
Why were they just taking things?
Schedule driven. So that's really, that's the order of the day.
They needed a part, they didn't want to wait for it.
Right.
What condition were these landing gear axles in?
They were corroded beyond repair.
In these photos provided to 60 Minutes, the axles are spray-painted red. Myers says he learned scrap parts marked like this had been taken without authorization for over a decade.
If the faulty parts are spray-painted red, would you be able to look at a part on a plane and go, that's faulty? Are they still red when they get on the plane?
Yeah, or it would get cleaned up.
How do they clean it up?
Well, just cleaner, chemicals, chemical cleaners.
They wash it off?
Yeah.
Boeing says it thoroughly investigated Myers' claims and that the defective axles did not make it onto airplanes. But Myers says the competition for airplane parts continued.
And they would talk openly about it at the stand-up meetings. Senior managers, that flap on that plane ahead of mine was supposed to be on mine, and that was taken by a competing manager. So managers
they're fighting
compete.
for faulty parts?
Yeah, and good parts. They're not too picky.
Wow.
Yeah.
And they talked about that openly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and vice presidents would attend that meeting often, and they would hear this and do nothing about it.
Sam Salapur might have more reason than anyone to do something about it. He's worked in aerospace as an engineer for 40 years.
I come from a space shuttle background. I don't know if you remember the Challenger explosion where we lost 7 people. Ever since that explosion, I have promised myself if I see problems that they are concerning or safety related, I am going to speak up until my face is blue.
Salapur works on the 777 line in Everett. He says when the jet is assembled, pre-drilled holes are supposed to line up to join pieces together. When they didn't, Salapur told federal investigators he observed Boeing employees trying to make them line up.
What were people doing to get the holes to align?
Force, crane forces, people jumping up and down to align the holes.
Jumping up and down?
Yeah, they were jumping up and down like this. When I see people are jumping up and down like that to align the hole, I'm saying we have a problem.
What happens then if you've got that pressure on these parts?
That's like going 1 time more on your paper clip, okay? And we know that paper clip doesn't break the first time, the second time, the third time, but it may be breaking on you the 30th or the 40th time.
You're saying this was happening over and over again?
It's still happening right now. Even right now, it's still happening.
In a statement to 60 Minutes, Boeing said it carefully investigates all quality and safety concerns, including those of the whistleblowers we spoke to, telling us some of their feedback contributed to improvements and other issues they raised were not accurate. Based on investigations over several years, none of their claims were found to affect airplane safety.
NTSB safety reports show Boeing plane accident numbers have declined over 2 decades, that they're safer than they've ever been.
Yeah.
How do you view that?
Right now, the MAX is a new program, so these airplanes that are having the quality issues are brand new to the fleet. We don't know what's going to be coming in the future.
Workers at the Wren factory where they make the MAX returned to work last month after a 7-week strike. But the FAA says they have not resumed production and are focused on training and, quote, making sure they have the supply chain sorted out. Sam Mohawk still works there. In June, he filed a federal whistleblower claim to protect him from possible retaliation.
I put a big target on my back in there.
So why'd you do it?
Because I'm concerned with safety. Like, at the end of the day, my friends and family fly on these airplanes.
The FAA is still investigating Sam Mohawk's claims, along with hundreds of others related to the Boeing company.
Her name is Frances Haugen. That is a fact that Facebook has been anxious to know since last month, when an anonymous former employee filed complaints with federal law enforcement. The complaints say Facebook's own research shows that it amplifies hate, misinformation, and political unrest, but the company hides what it knows. One complaint alleges that Facebook's Instagram harms teenage girls. What makes Haugen's complaints unprecedented is the trove of private Facebook research she took when she quit in May. The documents appeared first last month in the Wall Street Journal, but tonight, Frances Haugen is revealing her identity to explain why she became the Facebook whistleblower.
The thing I saw at Facebook over and over again was there were conflicts of interest between what was good for the public and what was good for Facebook. And Facebook over and over again chose to optimize for its own interests, like making more money.
Frances Haugen is 37, a data scientist from Iowa, with a degree in computer engineering and a Harvard master's degree in business. For 15 years, she's worked for companies including Google and Pinterest.
I've seen a bunch of social networks, and it was substantially worse at Facebook than anything I'd seen before.
You know, someone else might have just quit and moved on. And I wonder why you take this stand.
Imagine you know what's going on inside of Facebook, and you know no one on the outside knows. I knew what my future looked like if I continued to stay inside of Facebook, which is person after person after person has tackled this inside of Facebook, and ground themselves to the ground.
When and how did it occur to you to take all of these documents out of the company?
At some point in 2021, I realized, okay, I'm going to have to do this in a systemic way, and I have to get out enough that no one can question that this is real.
She secretly copied tens of thousands of pages of Facebook internal research. She says evidence shows that the company is lying to the public about making significant progress against hate, violence, and misinformation. One study she found from this year says, "We estimate that we may action as little as 3 to 5% of hate and about 0.6% of violence and incitement on Facebook, despite being the best in the world at it."
To quote from another one of the documents you brought out, "We have evidence from a variety of sources that hate speech, divisive political speech, and misinformation on Facebook and the family of apps are affecting societies around the world."
When we live in an information environment that is full of angry, hateful, polarizing content, it erodes our civic trust, it erodes our faith in each other, it erodes our ability to want to care for each other. The version of Facebook that exists today is tearing our societies apart and causing ethnic violence around the world.
Ethnic violence, including Myanmar in 2018, when the military used Facebook to launch a genocide.
The first quarter of 2019.
Frances Haugen told us she was recruited by Facebook in 2019. She says she agreed to take the job only if she could work against misinformation, because she had lost a friend to online conspiracy theories.
I never wanted anyone to feel the pain that I had felt, and I had seen how high the stakes were in terms of making sure there was high-quality information on Facebook.
At headquarters, she was assigned to Civic Integrity, which worked on risks to elections, including misinformation. But after this past election, there was a turning point.
They told us, we're dissolving Civic Integrity. Like, they basically said, oh, good, we made it through the election. There wasn't riots. We can get rid of Civic Integrity now. Fast forward a couple months, we got the insurrection. And when they got rid of Civic Integrity, it was the moment where I was like, I don't trust that they're willing to actually invest what needs to be invested to keep Facebook from being dangerous.
Facebook says the work of Civic Integrity was distributed to other units. Haugen told us the root of Facebook's problem is in a change that it made in 2018 to its algorithms, the programming that decides what you see on your Facebook newsfeed.
So, you have your phone. You might see only 100 pieces of content if you sit and scroll off for, 5 minutes. But Facebook has thousands of options it could show you.
The algorithm picks from those options based on the kind of content you've engaged with the most in the past.
And one of the consequences of how Facebook is picking out that content today is that it is optimizing for content that gets engagement or reaction. But its own research is showing that content that is hateful, that is divisive, that is polarizing, it's easier to inspire people to anger than it is to other emotions.
Misinformation, angry content is enticing to people and keeps them on the platform.
Yes. Facebook has realized that if they change the algorithm to be safer, people will spend less time on the site, they'll click on less ads, they'll make less money.
Haugen says Facebook understood the danger to the 2020 election, so it turned on safety systems to reduce misinformation. But many of those changes, she says, were temporary.
And as soon as the election was over, they turned them back off, or they changed the settings back to what they were before to prioritize growth over safety. And that really feels like a betrayal of democracy to me.
Facebook says some of the safety systems remained, but after the election, Facebook was used by some to organize the January 6th insurrection. Prosecutors cite Facebook posts as evidence, photos of armed partisans, and text including, "By bullet or ballot, restoration of the Republic is coming." Extremists used many platforms, but Facebook is a recurring theme. After the attack, Facebook employees raged on an internal message board copied by Haugen. Haven't we had enough time to figure out how to manage discourse without enabling violence? We looked for positive comments and found this. I don't think our leadership team ignores data, ignores dissent, ignores truth. But that drew this reply. Welcome to Facebook. I see you just joined in November 2020. We have been watching wishy-washy actions of company leadership for years now. Colleagues cannot conscience working for a company that does not do more to mitigate the negative effects of its platform.
Facebook essentially amplifies the worst of human nature.
It's one of these unfortunate consequences, right? No one at Facebook is malevolent, but the incentives are misaligned, right? Like Facebook makes more money when you consume more content. People enjoy engaging with things that elicit an emotional reaction. And the more anger that they get exposed to, the more they interact and more they consume.
That dynamic led to a complaint to Facebook by major political parties across Europe. This 2019 internal report obtained by Haugen says that the parties feel strongly that the change to the algorithm has forced them to skew negative in their communications on Facebook, leading them into more extreme policy positions.
The European political parties were essentially saying to Facebook, the way you've written your algorithm is changing the way we lead our countries.
Yes. You are forcing us to take positions that we don't like, that we know are bad for society. We know if we don't take those positions, we won't win in the marketplace of social media.
Evidence of harm, she says, extends to Facebook's Instagram app.
One of the Facebook internal studies that you found talks about how Instagram harms teenage girls.
Oh, yeah.
One study says 13.5% of teen girls say Instagram makes thoughts of suicide worse. 17% of teen girls say Instagram makes eating disorders worse.
And what's super tragic is Facebook's own research says, as these young women begin to consume this eating disorder content, they get more and more depressed, and it actually makes them use the app more. And so they end up in this feedback cycle where they hate their bodies more and more. Facebook's own research says it is not just that Instagram is dangerous for teenagers, that it harms teenagers. It's that it is distinctly worse than other forms of social media.
Facebook said just last week it would postpone plans to create an Instagram for younger children. Last month, Haugen's lawyers filed at least 8 complaints with the Securities and Exchange Commission, which enforces the law in financial markets. The complaints compare the internal research with the company's public face, often that of CEO Mark Zuckerberg, here testifying remotely to Congress last March.
We remove content that could lead to imminent real-world harm. We've built an unprecedented third-party fact-checking program. The system isn't perfect, but it's the best approach that we've found to address misinformation in line with our country's values.
One of Frances Haugen's lawyers is John Tye. He's the founder of a Washington legal group called Whistleblower Aid.
What is the legal theory behind going to the SEC? What laws are you alleging have been broken?
As a publicly traded company, Facebook is required to not lie to its investors or even withhold material information. So the SEC regularly brings enforcement actions alleging that companies like Facebook and others are making material misstatements and omissions that affect investors adversely.
One of the things that Facebook might allege is that she stole company documents.
The Dodd-Frank Act, passed over 10 years ago at this point, created an office of the whistleblower inside the SEC. And one of the provisions of that law says that no company can prohibit its employees from communicating with the SEC and sharing internal corporate documents with the SEC.
I have a lot of empathy for Mark, and Mark has never set out to make a hateful platform, but he has allowed choices to be made where the side effects of those choices are that hateful, polarizing content gets more distribution, more reach.
Facebook declined an interview, but in a written statement to 60 Minutes, it said, "Every day our teams have to balance protecting the right of billions of people to express themselves openly with the need to keep our platform a safe and positive place. We continue to make significant improvements to tackle the spread of misinformation and harmful content. To suggest we encourage bad content and do nothing is just not true. If any research had identified an exact solution to these complex challenges, the tech industry, governments, and society would have solved them a long time ago." Facebook is a $1 trillion company. Just 17 years old, it has 2.8 billion users, which is 60% of all Internet-connected people on Earth. Frances Haugen plans to testify before Congress this week. She believes the federal government should impose regulations.
Facebook has demonstrated they cannot act independently. Facebook over and over again has shown it chooses profit over safety. It is subsidizing, it is paying for its profits with our safety. I'm hoping that this will have had a big enough impact on the world that they get the fortitude and the motivation to actually go put those regulations into place. That's my hope.
If there's anything that the Swiss take more seriously than the precision of their watches or the quality of their chocolate, it's the secrecy of their banks. The subterranean vaults of Geneva and Zurich have served as sanctuaries for the wealth of dictators and despots, mobsters and arms dealers, corrupt officials, and tax cheats of all kinds. It's a world U.S. law enforcement has rarely been able to penetrate, so the idea that UBS, one of Switzerland's largest banks, would hand over information on thousands of American tax cheats would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. Tonight, you'll hear the twisted tale of how it all happened from a man some people have called one of the most important whistleblowers ever, who has been rewarded with a federal prison term and the possibility of endless riches. Though he was born and raised in the Boston area, Bradley Birkenfeld spent most of the last decade living in Switzerland, helping wealthy Americans hide their money. He was based in Geneva, where he says there may be more money-counting machines than parking meters in a country that once bragged it had more banks than dentists.
And it's not Swiss money in those banks, it's foreigners. You have a culture there that has been ingrained in society about managing people's money, protected by Swiss bank secrecy.
And who has a right to that information under Swiss law?
Only the banker and the bank itself.
How unusual is it for a Swiss banker to come forward and say, this is how it works?
It's never happened before in history. I'm the first one.
When Birkenfeld, a mid-level banker with an undistinguished employment history, knocked on the door of the U.S. Justice Department in the spring of 2007, he touched off an investigation that would threaten one of the world's largest banks with extinction and shake 300 years of Swiss banking secrecy to the foundations of its underground vaults. He did it by providing inside information and documentation that his former employer, banking giant UBS, was actively involved in helping its American clients defraud the U.S. Treasury out of billions of dollars in unpaid taxes. What do you think was the most valuable thing that you gave to the U.S. government?
The amount of clients and the amount of assets managed by UBS in the United States out of Switzerland.
And that was how much?
That was 19,000 clients and around 20 billion Swiss francs, which is about $19 billion.
Of the percentage of American accounts that you represented, how many would you say were trying to evade taxes?
My own clients. I would say about 90%.
Did people tell you this was their intention when they opened an account?
It was the unwritten rule. You didn't have to discuss it. People wouldn't fly all the way to Switzerland to open accounts just because they wanted to declare their money.
And as a private banker for UBS, Birkenfeld would help his clients invest, spend, and move their money. One example he told us about involved withdrawing cash from a customer's account, buying some diamonds in Geneva, and then smuggling them into the U.S. for the client inside a toothpaste tube. Birkenfeld claimed it was legal because the diamonds, he said, were worth less than $10,000 and didn't have to be declared at customs. If it was legal, why did you put them in a toothpaste tube? That's why I'm having trouble with that.
Oh, no, it was just a way of carrying them so I wouldn't lose them. Where would you put 2 diamonds?
I think I'd put them in a money belt, or I think I'd put them in a case.
It was a one-time event. That's not my business. I just put them in a toothpaste tube.
You weren't trying to hide them from customs?
No, not at all.
Buying diamonds and other valuables is just one way of hiding and transporting assets, and Birkenfeld insists that he was just providing a service to his clients, which is what Swiss banking is all about.
People would ask you to make purchases for them, possibly maybe a car or a chalet, possibly a nice watch. So you would also cater to the client in that regard and then deliver it to them upon their choosing.
And what would be their choosing?
It could be in their hotel room, it could be in maybe another country, could be there in Geneva.
So you were sort of not just a banker, but also a personal shopper?
If you will, at a concierge level.
Birkenfeld claims his motives in going to the Justice Department were mostly altruistic. He offered to wear a wire to gather evidence against high-level UBS executives in exchange for full immunity for his transgressions. But the negotiations broke down, and Birkenfeld neglected to tell them about his dealings with this man, California real estate developer Igor Alenikov, who was his biggest client. Birkenfeld helped Alenikov hide $200 million by introducing him to a consultant who specialized in creating shell companies and sham entities that concealed the ownership of the UBS accounts.
I don't sign people's tax return, so what they do with their taxes is not my business. I'm a banker.
So you would steer them to somebody who would help them hide their money?
You would recommend them to these service providers, that's correct.
You must have known deep down that it was illegal.
When you came into the U.S., you felt uncomfortable. That's correct.
But as a gesture of goodwill, Birkenfeld did give the Justice Department, Senate investigators, IRS agents, and the SEC lots of information about UBS and its secret activities.
Any transaction that happened on an account was held deep in the vault and sealed until the client came to pick it up personally. Then they would either take it with them, which was generally not the case, or they would tell you to shred it, which we would do on behalf of the client.
People didn't have online accounts.
It was forbidden. E-banking was forbidden for U.S. clients.
They didn't get statements in the mail?
No.
So if somebody wanted to know how much money they had in the bank and how their investments were doing, they had to go to Switzerland?
Or maybe see their banker when they came to the U.S.
It was those visits to the U.S. which Birkenfeld told the government about that ultimately got UBS in so much trouble. The bank would sponsor lavish events like yacht races in Newport and the Art Basel Modern Art Festival in Miami Beach to attract wealthy Americans. Then it flew in its bankers from Switzerland to mingle and to try and drum up new clients and conduct business with existing ones. Because the Swiss bankers weren't licensed to conduct business in the United States, it was a clear violation of American banking laws on U.S. soil, and Birkenfeld provided internal documents that proved the length that UBS would go to in order to avoid detection.
Call it a vacation rather than a business trip, rather than saying, oh yes, I'm coming to see my private clients here in the United States, and I'm coming in from Zurich, Switzerland.
Did you bring records into the country with you when you came in?
Generally, no, I did not. My colleagues brought in encrypted laptops.
Encrypted laptops?
Yes, so that even if they were discovered, you couldn't see what was inside the computers, which were portfolios of the clients, and they were product offerings for the clients.
They were going out of their way to cover their tracks.
Thomas Pirelli, the Associate Attorney General of the United States, says Birkenfeld was not the only person who provided valuable information to the investigation. But he says his evidence that UBS executives encouraged illegal behavior was the bank's Achilles heel.
They would bring checks, or sometimes they would actually carry money from one client to the next, all with the purpose of disguising and avoiding detection of large transfers of money.
What did that information tell you?
It was certainly surprising that there would be a unit within a major bank that would be behaving in that way.
And there was?
And there was. And we subsequently learned that senior officials knew about this. They knew it was wrong. They called it toxic waste, but it was very profitable and they didn't stop doing it.
Based on information provided by Birkenfeld, the Justice Department and the IRS obtained a court order demanding that UBS turn over records on the 19,000 Americans believed to have secret Swiss accounts. UBS then enlisted the help of the Swiss government to try and negotiate a settlement, finally agreeing to pay a $780 million fine, cease its offshore banking activities with Americans, and for the first time in history, turn over the names of more than 4,000 U.S. citizens suspected of tax fraud.
I think they knew we had a very strong case.
Right, and they did that because the U.S. government said that if you don't cooperate, we're going to take away your license to do business in the United States.
Well, we certainly told them that we had a strong case for criminal prosecution and that if we couldn't find another way to resolve that, that's where this was headed.
UBS realized that the Justice Department was holding all the cards. It had a major presence in the U.S. and 30,000 employees here, and it could not survive as a global banking power without access to the U.S. market.
If you had such a strong case, why didn't you get the names and numbers of every American account holder in Switzerland?
We got the accounts that really are the core of the fraud. The largest accounts, the accounts that have they're most clearly likely to be associated with fraud.
Since the scandal broke, nervous clients have withdrawn $160 billion from UBS's wealth management operation, and 14,700 Americans have notified the IRS that they had offshore bank accounts, taking advantage of a program that allows them to pay back taxes and penalties and escape prosecution, which should provide a windfall for the U.S. Treasury.
How much in tax revenue do you think you will have gained from this?
I've heard certainly the commissioner of the IRS say in the billions of dollars.
With the government claiming victory and UBS breathing a sigh of relief, the only person with grounds to be really unhappy is Bradley Birkenfeld, who the last time we saw him was wearing an electronic ankle bracelet, and the federal government had restricted his movements to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
I gave them the biggest tax fraud case in the world. I exposed 19,000 international criminals. And I'm going to jail for that?
As it turns out, while the U.S. government was using Birkenfeld's information to go after UBS, the Justice Department was closing in on his biggest client, Igor Alenikov, for tax evasion. Alenikov cooperated with the investigation and paid $52 million in fines and back taxes and got off with no jail time. But because Birkenfeld hadn't told prosecutors about his relationship with Alenikov, Birkenfeld was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit tax fraud. He pled guilty and has been sentenced to 40 months in prison, and he is not happy about it.
And you think that you should not be going to jail?
I think I shouldn't.
Even though you violated the law and you were an enabler. I mean, you were the person who were implementing these policies.
And I'm the only one going to prison. Out of 19,000 accounts and no Swiss bankers?
If he had come forward and told us everything that he knew, a complete and accurate picture in the summer of 2007, we think it's likely he wouldn't have been prosecuted.
Mr. Birkenfeld says that the federal government admits that the prosecutions would not have been successful without his participation in this, and yet he is the only one that is going to jail. Is that fair?
It is not uncommon for someone to engage in criminal activity and to provide us information, but to also go to jail.
The day he walks into prison is the day you will lose a generation of tax whistleblowers.
Why do you say that?
Because no one will blow the whistle.
Stephen Cohn is one of Birkenfeld's civil attorneys and the head of the National Whistleblower Center. He believes there may be one final twist in the case that could give his client the last laugh. That's because Birkenfeld may well be entitled to collect tens of millions of dollars under a federal law that rewards whistleblowers with up to 30% of the money that's recovered as a result of the information they provide, even if they end up going to jail.
Mr. Birkenfeld has saved the taxpayers billions of dollars, brought thousands of people to justice. They should blow up his check. The Attorney General should shake his hand and look into the camera, and he should say, I want a message to every international banker that works to money launder against America. You come here to America, you'll be protected and you'll be rewarded. Get 20, get 30 Birkenfelds. Let's fix this problem. Let's lower everybody's taxes.
The IRS will ultimately decide whether Birkenfeld qualifies for the reward. If he does, they'll have to mail the check to federal prison, where Birkenfeld is scheduled to report this Friday. But it could be worse than returning to Switzerland, regarded as a criminal and a traitor.
Do you think you'll ever go back to Switzerland again?
I don't believe I will.
Of all the things that you trust every day, you want to believe that your prescription medicine is safe and effective. The pharmaceutical industry says that it follows the highest standards for quality,
But in November, we found out just how much could go wrong at one of the world's largest drug makers. A subsidiary of GlaxoSmithKline pleaded guilty to distributing adulterated drugs. There was reason to believe some of the medications were contaminated with bacteria, others were mislabeled, and some were too strong or not strong enough. It's likely that Glaxo would have gotten away with it had it not been for a company insider. A tip from Cheryl Eckert set off a major federal investigation. She's never told the public what she saw inside Glaxo, but tonight she will. Her story opens a rare window on how one company traded its good name for bad medicine.
Cheryl Eckert worked in Glaxo quality control, and over 10 years she'd risen to become a manager of global quality assurance. Her job was to inspect plants like this Glaxo facility in North Carolina to make sure that the drugs had the right ingredients, the right potency, and met government standards for purity. In 2002, Eckert was assigned to help lead a quality assurance team to evaluate one of Glaxo's most important plants in Sidra, Puerto Rico. 900 people worked here, making 20 drugs for patients in the U.S. But Eckert says that when she saw what was happening to some of the company's most popular drugs, she couldn't believe it.
All the systems were broken. The facility was broken. The equipment was broken. The processes were broken. It was the worst thing I had run across in my career.
The worst because so many things behind these walls were going wrong at once. Eckert says water used to make tablets was tainted with bacteria. Failures on production lines made some drugs too strong, some not strong enough. And the employees were contaminating products, including the antibacterial ointment Bactroban, which was made in a sealed tank to prevent contamination.
They were opening up the lid, and then they were sticking their body into the tank and scraping it with like a paddle.
But this product is supposed to be free of bacteria. Why would they do that?
It saved money.
As her team continued its evaluation of the plant, Eckert says she discovered something much worse than contamination. Because of failures on various production lines, she says that powerful medications were getting mixed up.
Are you saying that different kinds of drugs were packed into the same bottle?
Yes, and that's shocking.
Yes, it is.
Shocking.
Eckert says this chart that she produced for company executives shows the kinds of mix-ups that were happening at Sidra. She identified 9, including Avandia diabetes pills mixed in packages with over-the-counter Tagamet antacids, and Paxil antidepressants mixed with the Avandia diabetes drug.
When you saw these mix-ups happening, what did you do?
I contacted the Vice President of Quality for North America, and I told him that he needed to shut down the factory and call the FDA.
Shut the whole thing down?
Right. I urged him to stop the trucks that were leaving the dock that day.
What happened then?
I went back to work and waited for the news that they had called the FDA or that they had stopped shipments, and it didn't happen.
Eckert says as the mix-ups continued, a pharmacist called the company with a story about a mix-up involving the powerful antidepressant Paxil in its 10 milligram dose. The patient was an 8-year-old boy.
A grandmother came in to pick up this little boy's prescription, and in front of the pharmacist, she opened up the bottle, she tore off the induction seal, and she looked at it and she became upset, and she said, "I knew it. His medicine has always been yellow, but last month it was pink, and he's been so sick."
And what did that mean, the yellow and the pink?
Paxil 10 milligram is yellow. It's not pink.
There is a version of Paxil that is pink. Paxil CR is 25 milligrams. If that's what the pills were, the boy was getting 2.5 times his prescribed dose. Eckert says that she assigned one of her investigators to the case and found that both Paxil doses were made on one production line, which led her to a theory of how the mix-up could have happened.
Maybe there was still Paxil in the hopper, the filling hopper, when they switched out the bottles and changed out the labels. So in that batch, some of the first bottles that went through were labeled 10 milligram when they were actually 25.
She says she took her findings to the same vice president that she had asked to shut down the plant 5 months before.
And I took it and I handed it to him. And I said to him, you know, read this. And he put his head down and put his hands over his face, and he said, oh my God, oh my God.
Did they shut down the plant then?
No, they filed a report with the FDA that said that the mix-up was not real and did not happen at the factory. We all knew, they all knew it was real.
The Glaxo report to the FDA Cheryl Eckert is talking about said it was extremely unlikely the Paxil mix-up occurred at Seadra. We don't know what happened to the boy because drug incident reports don't contain names. But the Glaxo note to the FDA said there were no adverse reactions. The vice president that Eckert says she spoke to is no longer with Glaxo, and he declined to talk with us. Glaxo denies Eckert's allegations, and it denies that it ever lied to the FDA. In fact, the company was eager to tell us that it has learned from Seadra. Ian McCubbin is a senior vice president from Glaxo headquarters in London.
We regret what happened in Seadra, but we've worked really, really hard to resolve those issues. We spend $600 million every year on make sure that our plant and equipment is state of the art.
Would you say that the company was chastened by all of this?
No, I'd say that the company was very disappointed that this occurred and that we regret that this occurred. But we've learned from it, and what you learn from, you become stronger.
You have how many plants around the world?
We have around 80 plants around the world now.
Do any of them operate in the way that Seadra did?
Absolutely not.
So how did Seadra go wrong?
They all operated to the same standard, the same quality system that we had in place. The difference between Seadra and all the rest of the plants was the effectiveness with which that quality system was implemented. It was much weaker, and that resulted in the compliance issues that occurred.
Cheryl Eckert says that she was issuing warnings and no one was listening.
I don't know Cheryl Eckert, and I don't know all the details of her accusations. What I do know is that we were working with the FDA before Cheryl went to that plant.
It was an FDA inspection that first revealed problems at Seadra, and that's why Glaxo sent Eckert's team in to resolve those FDA concerns. But Eckert says she found much more than the FDA did. FDA inspections of drug plants are only occasional, so it's up to the drug companies to police themselves.
Probably most drugs are safe that people are taking, but there are scary examples like this that certainly raise questions.
Dr. Jerry Avorn of Harvard Medical School is one of the nation's leading authorities on pharmaceuticals. He says that Eckert's story is an extraordinary look at what can happen when there aren't enough investigators to follow up on the federal inspections.
The fact that there were so many different kinds of problems and that there were even other issues about diabetes drugs and antidepressants on the same line getting allegedly mixed together, the sterility issues, it speaks of a really pretty chaotic, out-of-control manufacturing process. This was not apparently one isolated incident. It just looks like nobody was minding the store at this plant.
What do you say to someone who says, well, you know, the drug manufacturing process is very complicated, very hard to do. There are bound to be mistakes.
Just because something is complicated doesn't mean it's okay to get it wrong. We don't accept that of our brain surgeons or of our airlines or of other complicated things in society. The reason we pay so much for drugs, more than any other country, is that we expect that in exchange for those high prices, the companies are going to actually manage their manufacturing processes carefully.
Cheryl Eckert says her first warning to shut down the plant at Seadra came in August 2002. She continued to work 7 days a week, reporting to executives, but nothing seemed to be changing on the factory floor, and the frustration was taking its toll.
The director of manufacturing at the factory, maybe he was the VP of manufacturing at the factory, he pulled me aside and said, we can all tell that you've been crying. You come here every day, and your eyes are swollen because you've been crying. So I want to ask you to stop that. And I said to him, you know, I do cry. I cry at night, I cry in the morning. And what I don't understand is why I'm the only one. Why aren't you crying?
After 8 months of reporting problems at Seadra, Eckert sent this summary to 7 executives detailing 9 high-risk areas at the plant, including the mix-ups, the water contamination, and the problems with sterility. She warned that if the FDA knew what the company knew, the government could seize the factory. Weeks later, she was out of a job. Glaxo said it was downsizing. Still worried about patient safety, Eckert took the same information she'd sent to her Glaxo bosses and turned it over to the FDA. Just as she had warned, federal agents executed a search warrant at the plant and ultimately seized defective drugs worth hundreds of millions of dollars.
This case goes right to the heart of patient safety.
Neil Getnick and Leslie Ann Skillen are Cheryl Eckert's lawyers, and under the federal whistleblower law, they filed suit on behalf of the federal government, claiming that Glaxo had defrauded the taxpayers.
How is this fraud against the U.S. government?
Pharmaceutical drugs are paid for by our Medicare program for the elderly, by our Medicaid program for the impoverished. And here we have a situation where hundreds of millions of dollars were paid for adulterated drugs through our Medicaid programs.
Glaxo pleaded guilty to a felony. It admitted it distributed adulterated drugs, Paxil CR, Avandamint, a diabetes drug, Kytril, a drug given to cancer patients, and Bactroban. Altogether, the company paid $750 million to settle the criminal conviction and Cheryl Eckert's suit.
Can anything like this happen at Glaxo again?
I absolutely hope not. We will work really hard to resolve these issues and make sure that our quality management system is in place and robust.
The plant at Seadra is closed. Glaxo says no drugs made there are on the market today, and it says there is no evidence that anyone was hurt by the defective medications. Under the whistleblower law, Eckert was rewarded with a percentage of the millions that the government recovered in the fraud suit. Her portion comes to $96 million.
You know that there are people watching this interview who are saying, well, she did it for the money.
Right?
And to them you say what?
That I hope and I pray that their mothers and their brothers and their children have safer medicine today than they had before I filed that lawsuit. And I believe they will, right? I believe they will.
Nearly 2 years before 9/11, America's largest intelligence agency was tracking 3 of the al-Qaeda hijackers, but the information obtained by the National Security Agency wasn't analyzed in a way that would uncover the plot. Inside the super-secret NSA, several analysts and managers believed that the agency had a powerful tool that might have had a chance to head off 9/11, but it wasn't used. One of those agency insiders was Thomas Drake, who thought that taxpayer money was being wasted on useless intelligence-gathering projects while promising technology was ignored. Drake tried to get the word out, but now, as a result, he's been charged under the Espionage Act and could spend the rest of his life in prison. The government says he betrayed his country. Tom Drake says the only thing he betrayed was NSA mismanagement that undermined national security. After a long career in U.S. intelligence, Tom Drake never imagined he'd be labeled an enemy of the United States. As a young airman, he flew spy missions in the Cold War. In the Navy, here with President Clinton, he analyzed intelligence for the Joint Chiefs at the Pentagon. Later, he worked for defense contractors in the highly technical world of electronic eavesdropping. He became expert in sophisticated top-secret computer software and ultimately rose in 2001 to a senior executive job at the National Security Agency.
My first day on the job was 9/11.
Your first day on the job was 9/11?
It was 9/11. NSA went into immediate crisis management mode. We had failed to protect the United States of America.
You felt that was a failure of the National Security Agency?
The entire national security establishment. It was a failure, a fundamental systemic breakdown.
Part of the failure at the National Security Agency was in its old technology. These pictures from 60 Minutes in 2001 represent one of the only times cameras have ever been allowed inside the NSA. The NSA eavesdrops on the communications of the world, but in the 1990s, it was becoming ineffective, overwhelmed by the explosion of digital data.
Vast volumes of data streaming across all kinds of different networks, wired, wireless, phones, computers, you name it.
And what does that look like to NSA coming into their building in Maryland?
Choking on it. They're just incredible amounts. How do you keep, even just storing it was becoming a challenge.
Most of what the agency collected went unanalyzed, including clues pointing to 9/11. Kirk Wiebe and Bill Binney were career NSA intelligence analysts who were working on the problem.
We were greatly saddened and shocked by 9/11, but it didn't come as a total surprise. We knew there was a vulnerability, a lack of understanding of the data that put NSA in a weak position.
Recognizing that vulnerability in the late 90s, Bill Binney, a legendary NSA mathematician, led development of a revolutionary computer system to collect, isolate, and connect important information like phone calls and financial transactions. Its code name was ThinThread.
ThinThread was fundamentally dedicated to collecting and processing and ultimately analyzing the vast streams of digital data. It was a breakthrough solution.
Binney was pushing to use it even before the attack on America.
We proposed it for January of 2001.
9 months before 9/11.
Right.
Now, there is no answer to this next question because we'll never know. But if ThinThread had been deployed worldwide at the point that it was ready, is there a chance that information could have been picked up that might have headed off 9/11?
Indeed.
Absolutely, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. We had planned on going after all the appropriate targets at the time.
Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, Ayman al-Zawahiri, these were targets that you intended to focus ThinThread on. Is that correct?
Yes. Oh, I mean, the whole terrorist network, yeah.
And if you had been able to do that?
Well, we would have gotten the data, whatever that was there.
I believe it's very likely that, at least from the NSA perspective, the critical intelligence related to Al-Qaeda and associated movements would have been detected and reported.
It was a chance.
It's one of the great tragedies in the history of NSA. What could have been.
After 9/11, Tom Drake felt America was threatened as long as ThinThread was confined to the lab. But others at NSA doubted that ThinThread was up to the job, and one of them was Lieutenant General Michael Hayden, the head of the agency. Hayden wanted to transform the NSA and launched a massive modernization program codenamed Trailblazer. It was supposed to do what ThinThread did and a whole lot more. Trailblazer would be the NSA's biggest project. Hayden's philosophy was to let private industry do the job. Enormous deals were signed with defense contractors. Bill Binney's ThinThread program cost $3 million. Trailblazer would run more than $1 billion and take years to develop.
Do you have any idea why General Hayden decided to go with Trailblazer as opposed to ThinThread, which already existed?
I believe he was convinced by others that going with a large-scale industrial strength solution was the approach that NSA needed to take. You can't really understand why they would make that kind of a decision without understanding the culture of NSA.
Help me understand it.
Careers are built on projects and programs. The bigger, the better the career.
This might be just another Washington tale of competing defense projects and disgruntled losers, except the winner in this case, Trailblazer, was in trouble from the start. Contractors burned through hundreds of millions of dollars over years and still couldn't give the NSA the capability it so urgently needed.
As cost overruns soared and deadlines were broken, Tom Drake complained to his superiors. And then, privately, he informed the intelligence committees on Capitol Hill. He sought out Diane Rourke, the top Republican staffer on the House Intelligence Committee, who was responsible for overseeing the NSA.
First, he tried internally, trying to get things changed. He had gone to Congress. He went to the Senate as well as the House.
He went by the book?
He went by the book internally.
But Rourke says that in the years after 9/11, congressional committees were reluctant to kill any intelligence program, even one as mismanaged as Trailblazer. So Rourke, Bill Binney, and Kirk Wiebe took an extraordinary step. They filed a confidential complaint with the Department of Defense Inspector General, calling for an investigation of Trailblazer and Thin Thread. Tom Drake volunteered to be a witness.
Why did we launch the IG complaint? Out of total abject frustration, knowing that we had something so important to share and thought we had witnessed wrongdoing that needed to be addressed.
For 2 years, Drake was the most important witness for the Inspector General, but in the end, the Department of Defense investigation was stamped classified, which hid the Trailblazer debacle from public view. As his frustration grew, Drake says that he was shocked to learn about something else that was happening at the agency post 9/11. He learned of a top-secret NSA program that became known as warrantless wiretapping.
It was no longer necessary to follow the law. A huge Pandora's box had been opened up.
On orders from the White House, the NSA was listening in on people in the United States without a warrant from a judge.
And this is where I began to have grave concerns about the decisions that were made to bypass the Constitution willfully and deliberately as a result of 9/11. I took my grave concerns up with the general counsel at NSA. I spoke with one of their lead attorneys. He said, "Don't worry about it, Tom. It's all legal."
It was legal because the White House said it was legal?
Yes.
After 4 years of reporting through proper channels, Drake noticed that the Baltimore Sun newspaper had begun a series of articles about trouble at the NSA.
There's one final step that could be taken, but it was fraught with significant risk.
Anonymously, Drake contacted Baltimore Sun reporter Siobhan Gorman and became an unnamed source for her articles, starting with this one about Thin Thread, headlined, "NSA Shelved Better Program That Sifted Calls." Another article told readers that mismanagement at NSA continued years after 9/11.
Did you ever communicate classified information to Siobhan Gorman?
Did not.
Not once ever?
Not once ever. That was one of the fundamental rules, whether it was oral communication, whether it was written, electronic, or later on even in hard copy, it was all unclassified, period.
But after those articles, the FBI raided the homes of all the people you've met in this story who filed that confidential complaint with the Defense Department asking for the Trailblazer investigation.
They came busting in. I was in the shower at the time, and one of them came running up and was pointed a gun at my eyeballs and pulled me out of the shower. So
he drew a gun on you?
Yeah, he had it pointed at my head, yeah.
But only Drake was charged. He's being advised by the Government Accountability Project, a Washington legal organization that defends whistleblowers. Drake told us that he knew he'd violated a confidentiality agreement with the NSA, and he thought he might lose his job. But the prosecutors charged him under the Espionage Act, not for divulging classified information, but for taking classified papers home without permission. He faces up to 35 years.
How does a man see 9/11 happen, know that some part of it is due to corruption and mismanagement, and sleep at night? How does a man do that? He obviously couldn't.
Prosecutors declined to talk with us, citing the pending case against Drake, so we asked Washington attorney Abby Lowell what the prosecution is trying to prove and what Drake's potential defense would be. Lowell is not connected to the case, but he is one of the most experienced lawyers in the Espionage Act.
From the government and the prosecution's point of view, it's an important case to state
that if you're a government person, and if you've signed a confidentiality agreement, and you've got a security clearance based on your promise to keep our secret secret, that you don't get the right as an individual to decide when that secret should be kept or not because you've decided that the government is right or wrong about something it wants to do. To the people who are saying this is basically clamping down on information that the public has the right to know about whistleblowing, it's important because it will see whether or not if a person has the right motives, has the right intent, whether that is a defense that will work to prevent what is a very, very harsh statute with very harsh penalties if he were to be convicted.
Some people watching this interview are thinking to themselves in this moment, look, he knew what he was doing. He'd been trained, he'd been in the Air Force, he'd been in the Navy, he'd had a top security clearance for many, many years. He knew reaching out to a reporter was wrong under any rules, under any circumstances, and he deserves what he's getting.
Some have said that. On the other hand, I was an employee with the U.S. government, charged with supporting and defending the Constitution, ensuring that the best of America was put in the fight, ensuring that we did so legally, responsibly, and accountably.
Ultimately, the Trailblazer project chewed through more than $1.2 billion and then was canceled. The NSA and its former head, General Hayden, declined to comment for this story. Hayden retired, but in 2006, the day the Baltimore Sun ran one of its articles, he said this to Congress.
A lot of the failure in the Trailblazer program was in the fact we were trying to overachieve, and that a lot of the failure was we were trying to do too much all at once.
After the Trailblazer fiasco, Congress revoked NSA's authority to manage large projects for 5 years. Thomas Drake goes on trial next month.
Why do you think you were charged under the Espionage Act? That's pretty rare.
To send a chilling message.
To whom?
To other whistleblowers, to others in the government, not to speak out or speak out. Do not tell truth to power. We will hammer you.
In the midst of the worst drug epidemic in American history, the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration's ability to keep addictive opioids off U.S. streets was derailed. That, according to Joe Renassisi, one of the most important whistleblowers ever interviewed by 60 Minutes. Renassisi ran the DEA's Office of Diversion Control, the division that regulates and investigates the pharmaceutical industry. Now, in a joint investigation by 60 Minutes and The Washington Post, Renassisi tells the inside story of how, he says, the opioid crisis was allowed to spread, aided by Congress, lobbyists, and a drug distribution industry that shipped almost unchecked hundreds of millions of pills to rogue pharmacies and pain clinics, providing the rocket fuel for a crisis that over the last 2 decades has claimed 200,000 lives.
This is an industry that's out of control. What they want to do is do what they want to do and not worry about what the law is. And if they don't follow the law in drug supply, people die. That's just it. People die.
Joe Renassisi is a tough, blunt former DEA Deputy Assistant Administrator with a law degree, a pharmacy degree, and a smoldering rage at the unrelenting death toll from opioids. His greatest ire is reserved for the distributors, some of them multi-billion-dollar Fortune 500 companies. They are the middlemen that ship the pain pills from manufacturers like Purdue Pharma and Johnson & Johnson to drugstores all over the country. Renassisi accuses the distributors of fueling the opioid epidemic by turning a blind eye to pain pills being diverted to illicit use.
This is an industry that allowed millions and millions of drugs to go into bad pharmacies and doctors' offices that distributed them out to people who had no legitimate need for those drugs.
Who are these distributors?
The three largest distributors are Cardinal Health, McKesson, and AmerisourceBergen. They control probably 85 or 90% of the drugs going downstream.
You know the implication of what you're saying, that these big companies knew that they were pumping drugs into American communities that were killing people.
That's not an implication, that's a fact. That's exactly what they did.
In the late 1990s, opioids like oxycodone and hydrocodone became a routine medical treatment for chronic pain. Drug companies assured doctors and congressional investigators, as in this 2001 hearing, that the pain medications were effective and safe.
Addiction is not common. Addiction is rare in the pain patient who's properly managed.
With many doctors convinced the drugs posed few risks, prescriptions skyrocketed, and so did addiction. Many people who had become addicted to painkillers turned to shady pill mills, pain clinics with rogue doctors to write fraudulent prescriptions, and complicit pharmacists to fill them. One-stop shopping for controlled narcotics.
Pain clinics overnight popping up off an entrance ramp or an exit ramp on an interstate, and all of a sudden there's a pain clinic there.
Had you ever seen anything like that before?
Never. In fact, it was my opinion that this made the whole crack epidemic look like nothing. These weren't kids slinging crack on the corner. These were professionals who were doing it. They were just drug dealers in lab coats.
You know what a chilling picture that paints?
I do, because I watched them get arrested, and I was the one who approved the cases.
Despite arrests of unscrupulous purveyors, opioids kept flooding the black market. The death toll kept rising. This map shows the U.S. death rate from drug overdose in 1999. By 2015, the map looked like this. Most of these deaths were opioid-related. Joe Ranasisi told us prosecuting crooked doctors and pharmacists wasn't stemming the epidemic. So he decided to move up the food chain.
There had to be a choke point, and the choke point was the distributors.
What took you so long to go to that choke point of the distributors?
This was all new to us. We weren't seeing just some security violations and a few bad orders. We were seeing hundreds of bad orders that involved millions and millions of tablets. That's when we started going after the distributors.
A distributor's representative told us the problem is not distributors, but doctors who overprescribe pain medication. But the distributors know exactly how many pills go to every drugstore they supply, and they are required under the Controlled Substances Act to report and stop what the DEA calls suspicious orders, such as unusually large or frequent shipments of opioids. But DEA investigators say many distributors ignored that requirement.
They had a business plan. Their plan was to sell a lot of pills and make a lot of money, and they did both of those very well.
Jim Geldof, a 40-year DEA veteran, ran pharmaceutical investigations from DEA's Detroit field office. Frank Yonkers supervised the agency's operations in Cincinnati. Joe Ranasisi was their supervisor. They saw distributors shipping thousands of suspicious orders. One example, a pharmacy in Kermit, West Virginia, a town of just 392 people, ordered 9 million hydrocodone pills over 2 years.
All we were looking for is a good faith effort by these companies to do the right thing. And there was no good faith effort. Greed always trumped compliance. It did every time. But don't sit here and tell me, well, we're not sure what a suspicious order is. Really? I mean, this pharmacy just bought 50 times the amount that a normal pharmacy purchases, and they're in a town of 5,000 people. You don't know that that's suspicious? I mean, at some point, you're just turning a blind eye to it.
These companies are a big reason for this epidemic.
Yeah, absolutely they are. And I can tell you with 100% accuracy that we were in there on multiple occasions trying to get them to change their behavior, and they just flat out ignored us.
In 2008, the DEA slapped McKesson, the country's largest drug distributor, with a $13.2 million fine. That same year, Cardinal Health paid a $34 million fine. Both companies were penalized by the DEA for filling hundreds of suspicious orders, millions of pills. Over the last 7 years, distributors' fines have totaled more than $341 million. The companies cried foul and complained to Congress that DEA regulations were vague, and the agency was treating them like a foreign drug cartel. In a letter, the Healthcare Distribution Alliance, which represents distributors, told us they wanted to work with the DEA. Effective enforcement, they wrote, must be a two-way street. Frank, you said you were tough but fair. The industry says you guys were unfair, that you were taking unfair hits at them.
So that's the people who lost their sons and daughters. See how fair they think it is.
In 2011, more than 17,000 Americans died from opioid prescription overdoses. That same year, Cardinal Health, the second largest distributor, started pushing back at Joe Renassisi. The company's attorneys went over his head and called his bosses at the Justice Department, who called in Renassisi to have him explain his tactics.
It infuriated me that I was over there trying to explain what my motives were or why I was going after these corporations. And when I went back to the office and I sat down with my staff, I basically said, you know, I just got questioned on why we're doing what we're doing. This is war. We're going after these people, and we're not going to stop.
Do you really think you were getting this pushback because you were going after big companies, Fortune 500 companies?
I have no doubt in my mind. So the question is, why would it be any different for these companies as compared to the small mom and pops that we had done hundreds of times before?
What's the difference?
The difference is they have a lot of money and a lot of influence, and that's the difference.
Renassisi says the drug industry used that money and influence to pressure top lawyers at the DEA to take a softer approach. Former DEA attorney Jonathan Novak said it divided the litigation office. He said in 2013 he noticed a sea change in the way prosecutions of big distributors were handled. Cases his supervisors once would have easily approved now weren't good enough.
We had been achieving incredible success in an almost unstoppable wave, and then suddenly it stopped.
Novak prosecuted cases brought to him by Joe Renassisi's investigators. He said his caseload started to slow down dramatically.
These were not cases where it was black, where it was gray. These were cases where the evidence was crystal clear that there was wrongdoing going on.
He said his bosses started to bog down the system, demanding ever more evidence.
But now, 3 undercovers by 4 officers over 3 months, that wouldn't be enough. Maybe we need an expert to explain how recording equipment works. Maybe we need an expert to explain the system for prescribing. What's a prescription? It felt honestly confusing and almost insane. Where was this coming from?
Jim Geldof says his investigations were getting bogged down too. He was looking into one mid-sized distributor that had shipped more than 28 million pain pills to pharmacies in West Virginia over 5 years. About 11 million of those pills wound up in Mingo County, population 25,000. Suddenly, he said, he ran into roadblocks from one of attorney Jonathan Novak's bosses.
I spent a year working on this case. I send it down there, and it's never good enough. Every time I talk to this guy, he wants something else. And I get it for him, and that's still not good enough. You know, and this goes on and on and on. And when these roadblocks get thrown up in your face, at that point, you know they just don't want the case.
But this is the DEA. That's what you're supposed to do.
Yeah, you would think.
The DEA's toughest sanction is to freeze distributors' shipments of narcotics, a step they haven't taken in almost 2 years.
I mean, there's no denying the numbers. At the height of the opioid epidemic, inexplicably, they slowed down.
He said one big reason for the slowdown, DC's notorious revolving door. Novak said he saw a parade of DEA lawyers switch sides and jump to high-paying jobs defending the drug industry. Once they'd made the leap, they lobbied their former colleagues, Novak's bosses, and argued the DEA's cases were weak and ultimately would lose in court. It had a chilling effect on DEA litigators.
Some of the best and brightest former DEA attorneys are now on the other side and know all of the weak points. Their fingerprints are on memos and policy and emails going out where you see this concoction of what they might argue in the future.
You and the other attorneys had been winning these cases.
All of the time.
The Justice Department is the agency that oversees the DEA. A senior attorney at the department at the time told us in a statement, Department of Justice leadership was not advised that DEA had changed enforcement strategies. Any significant policy shift should have been brought to our attention.
There was a lot of pills, a lot of people dying, and we had tools in our toolbox to try to use and stem that flow. But it seemed down in headquarters that that toolbox was shut off.
You're watching an out-of-control epidemic, and yet you both feel that at the height of this epidemic, your hands were being tied.
Yeah. If it's a war on drugs, then treat it like a war.
The addiction rate was still increasing. The amount of people seeking treatment was still increasing. It was all increasing. Still, the amount of prescriptions were increasing. And we started slowing down.
As cases nearly ground to a halt at DEA, the drug industry began lobbying Congress for legislation that would destroy DEA's enforcement powers. That part of the story when we return. In 2013, Joe Renassisi and his DEA investigators were trying to crack down on big drug distributors that ship drugs to pharmacies across the country. He accused them of turning a blind eye as millions of prescription pain pills ended up on the black market. Then a new threat surfaced on Capitol Hill. With the help of members of Congress, the drug industry began to quietly pave the way for legislation that essentially would strip the DEA of its most potent tool in fighting the spread of dangerous narcotics.
If I was going to write a book about how to harm the United States with pharmaceuticals, the only thing I can think of that would immediately harm is to take the authority away from the investigative agency that is trying to enforce the Controlled Substances Act and the regulations implemented under the Act. And that's what this bill did.
The bill, introduced in the House by Pennsylvania Congressman Tom Marino and Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn of Tennessee, was promoted as a way to ensure that patients had access to the pain medication they needed. Jonathan Novak, who worked in the DEA's legal office, says what the bill really did was strip the agency of its ability to immediately freeze suspicious shipments of prescription narcotics to keep drugs off U.S. streets, what the DEA calls diversion.
You're not going to be able to hold anyone higher up the food chain accountable.
Because of this law?
Because of this law.
How hard does it make your job in going after the wholesale distributors?
I would say it makes it nearly impossible.
This 2015 Justice Department memo we obtained supports that. It states the bill could actually result in increased diversion, abuse, and public health and safety consequences.
They're toothless. I don't know how they stop this now. It's a very sad state of affairs.
Who drafted the legislation that would have such a dire effect? The answer came in another internal Justice Department email released to 60 Minutes and the Washington Post under the Freedom of Information Act. Quote, Lyndon Barber used to work for the DEA. He wrote the Marino bill.
Hi, my name's Lyndon Barber. I'm the director of the DEA Litigation and Compliance Practice in Quarles and Brady's Health Law Group.
Barber went through the revolving door. He left his job as associate chief counsel of the DEA and within a month joined a law firm where he lobbied Congress on behalf of drug companies and wrote legislation. He advertised what he could offer a client facing DEA scrutiny.
If you have a DEA compliance issue, or you're facing a government investigation, or you're having administrative or civil litigation involving the Controlled Substances Act, I'd be happy to hear from you.
It's not surprising that this bill that has intimate knowledge of the way that DEA regulations are enforced, the way that those laws work, was written by someone who spent a lot of time there, charged a lot of cases there.
Knew the workings.
Very much so.
Eric Holder was the Attorney General at the time. He warned the new law would undermine law enforcement efforts to prevent communities and families from falling prey to dangerous drugs. The major drug companies, distributors, chain drugstores, and pharmaceutical manufacturers mobilized too. According to federal filings, during the 2 years the legislation was considered and amended, they spent $106 million lobbying Congress on the bill and other legislation, claiming the DEA was out of control, making it harder for patients to get needed medication. A particular thorn for the drug industry and the bill's sponsors was Joe Renassisi. He had been a witness before Congress more than 30 times and was called on again to testify about this bill.
16,651 people in 2010 died of opiate overdose, opiate-associated overdose. This is not a game. We're not playing a game.
Nobody is saying it is a game, sir. We're just trying to craft some legislation. Let me ask you.
Renassisi, who admits to having a temper, felt so strongly about the damage the bill could do, he lashed out at Marino's committee staffers.
It is my understanding that Joe Renassisi, a senior DEA official, has publicly accused we sponsors of the bill of, quote, supporting criminals, unquote. This offends me immensely.
Congressman Marino from Pennsylvania said that you accused him of helping criminals.
I've never accused Congressman Marino of helping criminals. I said that this bill is going to protect defendants that we have under investigation. And if Congressman Marino thinks I accused him of something, I don't know what to tell you.
But a week after the hearing on legislation that would hobble the DEA's enforcement authority, Marino and Blackburn wrote the Inspector General for the Justice Department demanding that Renassisi be investigated for trying to, quote, intimidate the United States Congress.
There were people in industry that didn't care much for Joe Renassisi, wanted him silenced or wanted him out of the way, basically unceremoniously kick him to the curb.
After almost 30 years with the DEA, Matt Murphy, Renassisi's lieutenant, became a consultant for the drug industry, an industry with which he is now disillusioned. He said he was shocked at the animosity he witnessed toward his friend and former boss.
My theory is that, the industry, through lobbying groups, donated a certain amount of money to politicians to get a law passed that favored the industry, and also maybe using those political ties to have Joe removed.
Congress launched an investigation of him.
Right.
And he was out.
Yeah, pressure was put on for him to be moved out. I'm pretty confident of that. There was no reason to take the guy who was the most qualified person in DEA to run the Office of Diversion Control out of the Office of Diversion Control.
The investigation requested by Congressman Marino against Renassisi went nowhere. But soon after, Renassisi was stripped of his responsibilities. He says he went from supervising 600 people to supervising none. So he resigned.
We were totally focused on all these people dying and all these drugs being diverted. And we were not really looking at our flanks, waiting for somebody to come after us. So maybe that was my fault, and I just never realize that that was something that would have occurred.
In the end, the DEA signed off on the final version of the Marino bill. A senior DEA representative told us the agency fought hard to stop it, but in the face of growing pressure from Congress and industry lobbyists, was forced to accept a deal it did not want. The bill was presented to the Senate in March of 2016.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the
Majority Leader Mitch McConnell introduced the legislation, and it passed the Senate through unanimous consent, with no objections and no recorded votes.
Without objection.
It passed the House the same way, with members of Congress chatting away on the floor.
Without objection, the bill was read a third time and passed.
A week later, with no objections from Congress or the DEA, President Barack Obama signed it into law, without ceremony or the usual bill signing photo op. Marino issued a press release the next day claiming credit for the legislation. The drug distributors declared victory and told us the new law would in no way limit DEA's enforcement abilities. But DEA Chief Administrative Law Judge John J. Mulrooney, who must adjudicate the law, wrote in a soon-to-be-published Marquette Law Review article we obtained that the new legislation, quote, would make it all but impossible to prosecute unscrupulous distributors.
I just don't understand why Congress would pass a bill that strips us of our authority in the height of an opioid epidemic in places like Congressman Marino's district and Congressman Blackburn's district. Why are these people sponsoring bills when people in their backyards are dying from drugs that are coming from the same people that these bills are protecting?
Why do you think that is?
Because I think that the drug industry, the manufacturers, wholesalers, distributors, and chain drugstores have an influence over Congress that has never been seen before. And these people came in with their influence and their money and got a whole statute changed because they didn't like it.
7 months after the bill became law, Congressman Marino's point man on the legislation, his chief of staff, Bill Tye, became a lobbyist for the National Association of Chain Drug Stores. Since the crackdown on the distributors began, the pharmaceutical industry and law firms that represent them have hired at least 46 investigators, attorneys, and supervisors from the DEA, including 32 directly from the division that regulates the drug industry. Mike Gill, chief of staff for the DEA administrator, was hired by HDJN, one of the country's largest healthcare law firms. And most recently, Jason Hadges, a senior DEA attorney overseeing enforcement cases during the slowdown, joined the pharmaceutical and regulatory division of D.C.-based law firm Hogan Lovells. He declined to speak with us. Amerisource Bergen and McKesson declined our request to appear on camera. So did Cardinal Health, which 3 months ago hired the author of the bill, Lyndon Barber, as senior vice president. With Scott Hyam and Lenny Bernstein of the Washington Post, we called the head of public relations of Cardinal and asked to speak with Barber. This is Bill Whitaker. I'm a correspondent with 60 Minutes. I was calling to see if we could speak with Lyndon Barber. We were told the company would not make him available. We also tried for several months to speak to Congressman Marino. Finally, we went to his D.C. office. Hello, I'm Bill Whitaker with 60 Minutes.
Yes.
And we'd like to speak with Congressman Marino, if we could.
I'm going to have to refer you to our chief of staff.
We were told he was not available.
Okay, can you please turn the camera off, and we'll have to ask the camera to leave the office.
His staff then called the Capitol Hill police on us.
Just accept the uninvite and leave the area.
When Joe Renassisi looks back, he has one regret.
You know, all these people that died happened under my watch. The one thing I wanted to do, the one thing I just thought would have the most impact is to lock up, arrest one of these corporate officers. You arrest a corporate officer, you arrest somebody that's involved in the decision process, knowing what the law is. If you make that arrest, then everybody sits up and takes notice, because three-piece suit guys just don't do well in prison. They don't.
Joe Renassisi now consults with state attorneys general who have filed suit against distributors for their role in the opioid crisis. Tennessee Congresswoman Marsha Blackburn is running for the Senate. As for Congressman Marino, he was just nominated to be President Donald Trump's new drug czar. The Roman Catholic Church is facing its biggest crisis in the United States since the Boston sex abuse scandal 16 years ago. 13 states are now investigating whether abuse was concealed by church leaders, including bishops who head each diocese. We have learned one place under scrutiny by federal investigators is Buffalo, New York. In August, information about dozens of accused priests was leaked from the diocese's secret archive. What it revealed infuriated many of Buffalo's 600,000 Catholics. Tonight, you will hear from a priest who will share his direct knowledge about what he has called a cover-up. But first, the anonymous whistleblower who uncovered proof that Bishop Richard Malone withheld the names of dozens of priests accused of abuse. Until now, Siobhan O'Connor had carefully kept her identity secret.
I've had to rely on God even more than I ever have before.
She is the whistleblower who leaked records from the secret archive of the Diocese of Buffalo. Siobhan O'Connor worked closely with Bishop Richard Malone as his executive assistant for 3 years. Last week, she spoke with the FBI. Some people would say that you betrayed Bishop Malone.
I did betray him, and yet I can't apologize for that because there was a greater good to consider.
The hundreds of pages Siobhan O'Connor uncovered included personnel files and memos. They revealed that for years, Bishop Malone allowed priests accused of sexual assault, such as statutory rape and groping, to stay on the job.
I love my church, I love our diocese, and I loved him. I genuinely did, as my bishop and as my boss.
So why are you doing this?
The reality of what I saw really left me with no other option, because at the end of my life, I'm not going to answer to Bishop Malone. I'm going to answer to God.
At first, she took pictures with her phone. Then she used the copy machine here at the bishop's offices. The documents provided an extraordinary window into how the diocese handled abuse. And nobody caught on to what you were doing?
No, they didn't. I was always working with paper, and I was always there. So it wasn't as though I had to ask for keys or take them from someone's desk.
Her decision to act was influenced by the phone calls she fielded from dozens of people who said they had been abused. O'Connor says she tried to get the bishop to be more responsive to them. He would tell her it's not her concern. She said by last summer, she was, in her words, morally allergic to what she witnessed. Just before O'Connor quit her job in August, she anonymously leaked the church documents to a reporter at Buffalo television station WKBW. There was no other way you saw to handle this?
Not with any expediency, no. I mean, I did hope and pray that a grand jury would eventually be convened and that there would be hopefully an independent investigation, but I felt that there could be other victims between now and then, and I couldn't have that on my conscience if there was a way to prevent that.
Her doubts began in March. Bishop Malone had agreed to release a list of 42 priests accused of sexually abusing minors. But O'Connor knew there should be more names because she had seen the draft list that circulated between the bishop and diocesan lawyers. There was also something else, a dossier about priests she discovered in a supply closet.
There was one particular binder which was of pending litigation that had been presented to Bishop Malone when he first was installed as our bishop. And this was from the lawyers. And this was a large, over 300-page binder, and I found it when I was cleaning the closet where they kept the bishop's vacuum. And I remember finding this obviously very important and sensitive information and thinking, how did it ever end up here, first of all? And then I was shocked at the volume of it.
The cases in the dossier Bishop Malone inherited when he arrived in 2012 stretched back decades. As they worked on the list, the bishop and his lawyers decided they would not reveal the names of accused priests still in ministry.
It was a very carefully curated list, and I saw all the lawyers coming in and out, and I was aware of the various strategies that were in place.
What were they trying to do, if not help the victims?
Well, to my mind, the overarching attitude seemed to be to protect the church's reputation and her assets.
And the assets.
Mm-hmm. Very much so.
Siobhan O'Connor was most alarmed to see that Father Arthur Smith was missing from the list. Church records showed 2 young men in Buffalo had complained in 2013 that Smith had inappropriately touched them. 2 years before that, Smith was sent to counseling after repeated contact with an 8th grade boy that included unwanted attention and Facebook messages. Despite what Bishop Malone knew, he endorsed Smith for a job as a cruise ship chaplain. The bishop wrote, "I am unaware of anything in his background which would render him unsuitable to work with minor children."
Our previous bishop had removed him from ministry, so I always thought it was odd that Bishop Malone had reinstated him. When I explored his file more in depth, that might have really been the moment when I knew that I had to do something with this information.
Remember, the diocese list had 42 names. The documents O'Connor revealed put the number of Buffalo priests facing claims of all types of abuse at 118. They had accusations against them, credible accusations?
Yes, that's right.
What did you think of that?
I felt that instead of being transparent, we were almost being the opposite, or half transparent. Here are the names that we would like you to know about, but please don't ask us about the rest.
One of them was Father Fabian Mariansky. His file included an accusation that during the 1980s he had sexual relations with a girl that began when she was just 15. The diocese knew about it, but a note in the file argued Mariansky should be excluded from the list of problem priests. It said, "We did not remove him from ministry despite full knowledge of the case, and so including him on list might require explanation."
And I remember thinking, if that's the rationale for leaving a priest off, then how can I abide by this?
She was not alone. Father Bob Ziliaks advised the bishop on church law, including abuse cases. He told us he was disgusted by how the cases he saw were handled.
I think the hypocrisy, the lip service, yes, Bob, I agree with you, and then I would walk out of an office and nothing would happen.
It is exceedingly rare for a Catholic priest to risk challenging his bishop in public. Father Ziliaks left his role as the bishop's counsel in May to concentrate on his parish ministry.
A lot of cases should have been handled differently. They were not. A lot of cases probably should have gone to Rome at the time. They did not.
How many of those priests should have been taken out of the priesthood?
I would argue at least 8 or 9.
How many of them still are in the priesthood here in Buffalo?
All of them.
All of them?
All the guys that should have been removed from the priesthood are still priests.
What do you think of that?
It's beyond troubling. That's not the church. The church is holy. Those are individuals in the church who are weak and who have made very bad decisions. And because of that, they need to be held accountable for what they've done.
Why is it, do you think, that the clergy fails to get this?
I think one of the factors that goes into decision-making in terms of administration or leadership within dioceses or in parishes is that there's a certain brotherhood. There's a certain mindset that we watch each other's backs.
Bishop Malone has the authority to strip Father Ziliaks of his duties for going public. But the priest told us he is motivated to speak out by more than the truth. He also is a victim of sexual abuse by a Buffalo priest.
And so all of this has really been very painful for me to see how our diocese, how other dioceses have handled this.
How old were you when you were abused?
I was a 13-year-old boy.
By a priest?
By a priest.
How did that experience affect you while you were watching how Bishop Malone was handling these cases?
It was very difficult in a lot of different ways. There's a certain respect that is owed to a bishop. But when I saw things take place the way they did, I sort of was conflicted within. I think as a victim, I have a bias, which is maybe not a healthy thing, but objectively, I have no tolerance for any abuse.
Every bishop chooses a motto. Bishop Malone's is, live the truth in love. Bishop Malone declined our request for an interview.
He's behaving in a way that you would typically think that a CEO in a corporation that's being accused of corrupt practices might act, hiding behind attorneys.
Paul Snyder was the first member of Buffalo's Catholic clergy to call for Malone to resign. The hotel owner is a deacon. That's an ordained member of the clergy who can be married and preside over some ceremonies. He was enraged by the information Siobhan O'Connor exposed. Bishop Malone has called this a crisis. You call it a scandal. What's the difference?
A crisis is we look at our home and it's burning to the ground. A scandal is while it's burning to the ground, you know how to put the fire out, but you don't tell me. You also know how the fire was caused, but you don't tell me. So you pretend to grieve with me about the fire, but the problem is you caused it.
Snyder showed us some of the 400 notes and emails he has received since calling for the bishop to resign.
Like they want to be part of a solution, but they think this bishop is preventing that from occurring.
This month, Snyder sent letters and documents to prominent bishops demanding an investigation. Why do you have faith that the bishops are going to handle this?
Well, I don't have faith right now that any particular bishops have the courage to do the right thing. I mean, we all praise our martyrs on Sunday, and we praise and we sing. But boy, it sure as hell is hard being a saint when it's your ass on the line. And I want these cardinals and these bishops to start putting their ass on the line and start protecting their people.
Bishops hold supreme power in their diocese and answer only to the Pope. Next month, U.S. bishops will gather to consider a proposal for a bishop code of conduct. Bishop Malone plans to be there. He's refused to resign.
The shepherd does not desert the flock at a difficult time. May God, who founded the church and...
The bishop has made 3 public apologies and offered to sell his 11,000 square foot official residence to help compensate victims. Last week, he sent us a statement that said, in part, "We continue to reach out to victims, remove clergy with substantiated allegations from ministry, and cooperate with federal and state investigations." But in Bishop Malone's first 6 years in Buffalo, just 1 priest was put on leave. It was only after this scandal broke in March that he suspended 16 more for abuse. None has been kicked out of the priesthood. He has said he's sorry. He has apologized. Do you forgive him?
I accept it and I forgive him, but actions speak louder than words. Show us these cases are being handled properly. Show us that priests are being removed.
You would like for Bishop Malone to resign?
I would. I believe that it would be in the best interest of the diocese because he's had opportunities to enact real change, and he's let those opportunities come and go.
Money laundering is the way clever crooks hide and eventually spend all of the money they've stolen. And this is a tale about what's believed to be the biggest money laundering scheme in history. It involves nearly $250 billion of very suspicious money from Russia and the former Soviet Union that was funneled into the Western banking system right under the noses of major banks and regulators in the United States and Europe, who either facilitated it or turned a blind eye. At the heart of it is a whistleblower who found one loose thread and decided to pull on it.
Howard Wilkinson is an Oxford man, cautious, prudent, and a bit of a stickler. After his cover was blown last fall in a newspaper article as the person who uncovered the scandal, he has spent much of his time wandering the British countryside, trying not to be found.
Being named as a whistleblower in a case involving dirty Russian money, it's not a good place to be.
You're still concerned?
You've got to be, haven't you? The very nature of the people who want to launder money probably means that they're not the sort that you want to go down the pub and have a pint with.
But he did sit down with us and told his tale about a financial crime so big, it's hard to fathom.
The end number that's reported for the whole thing over the 6 or 7 years is $230 billion of suspicious money.
One bank?
One bank, $230 billion.
One branch?
One branch.
Wilkinson had worked there as a mid-level executive for Danske Bank, the biggest financial institution in Denmark and one of the most respectable banks in Europe. As head of markets for the Baltics, he worked out of a branch in Tallinn, Estonia, a former Soviet republic, now a NATO member, right next door to the Russian bear. There were tensions, but also business opportunities, and Wilkinson eventually discovered his branch's biggest business was converting Russian rubles of highly questionable origin into crisp, clean, untraceable American dollars.
Customers would be calling up every morning, please, I want to sell 20 million rubles and buy dollars. We would quote them the price for that. They would get the dollars. Basically, that was the large part of what we did.
And there was nothing illegal about that?
The banks are supposed to check the money coming in. Is it clean? And the banks are supposed to check where does the money go in the end.
And you're saying it wasn't being done?
Evidently, it wasn't being done.
That's an example of British understatement. International money laundering laws require that banks know their customers and report suspicious transactions to authorities. Yet suspicious transactions would turn out to be the vast majority of the business in the bank's non-resident portfolio, which was made up of clients from Russia, Azerbaijan, and other former Soviet states.
A lot of this money came into the bank and was out the door the next day, right?
The next day? Or you think it was that slow? You know, the customers would call every day, they would sell their rubles for dollars, and that would be what we'd see. We didn't, we didn't see where the money went.
So your business is really to execute the trades?
Yeah, basically.
Not vet the clients?
Absolutely not to vet the clients.
That job, Wilkinson was assured, was being done by a special committee that carefully screened all international customers before they were allowed to open an account. He discovered otherwise almost by accident when a colleague asked him to help with some paperwork on one of the bank's big customers, a British company called Lantana Trade LLP.
To me, being British, the obvious place to look for financial information about a company is the public register. This is public. But apparently this was rocket science. Apparently this was rocket science and no one had ever thought about it.
Wilkinson consulted a British government website known as Companies House.
I paid £1, $1.30, and I got the company's financial statements. And it was a bit strange because it said that the company was dormant. Now, dormant means the company hasn't done a single transaction.
He knew that couldn't have been right, having looked at Lantana's bank statement.
How much Lantana money was passing through the bank?
It's up to 20 million a day.
20 million a day?
Yeah, some days.
Not exactly dormant.
It's not dormant at all.
The public documents raised other suspicions. Lantana seemed to be a British company in name only, with a postal address in an unremarkable office building in North London that it shared with at least 64 other shell companies with accounts at Danske Bank Estonia and connections to remote exotic places known for banking secrecy and money laundering.
So we've got a UK company with a registered office in North London, with an account in an Estonian bank that's actually run by Russians, and the partners, the owners, are from the Seychelles and the Marshall Islands.
To Wilkinson, it screamed money laundering. He explained what he found to people at the bank who handled the Russian accounts and was told that it was a simple paperwork screw-up that would be fixed. 13 months later, he heard that Lantana had been told to take its banking business elsewhere. Among the concerns was money laundering by a member of the Putin family.
It seemed to be Mr. Igor Putin, who's, I think, the cousin of the Russian president. There were links to the FSB. The FSB is, I think, the successor to the KGB, so some sort of secret police. The people running the company had been associated with several banks that had gone bust in Russia in bad circumstances.
Igor Putin, the president's first cousin, has been associated with other Russian money laundering schemes, but has always professed his innocence. To Howard Wilkinson, hearing the Putin name was further confirmation that something was wrong.
What did you do then?
This needed to go to Copenhagen. This needed to go to the head office. So I made a whistleblowing report to 4 very senior executives, including one of the executive board, a whistleblowing report about what had happened and what seemed to be wrong.
Concerned that others at the bank might be involved in a cover-up, Wilkinson decided to look into 3 more of the bank's customers that were registered in Britain.
I paid £3 and I took the accounts for these next 3, and they were all false.
You're 4 for 4.
I'm batting 4 for 4.
Is it possible that people just could have missed this?
Well, I then went 16 for 16 by looking at another 12. So, of which 15 were the same address. So, yeah, at some point, it stops being possible to be a coincidence. Not just were the accounts all false, the accounts all basically look the same. I mean, basically just change a couple of numbers, but they all basically look the same.
When you started doing all this, what did people say to you at the bank?
Nothing.
Nothing?
Exactly. Nothing. People stopped calling around to say hello.
Is it true that a high-ranking executive at the bank told you, quote, "This bank is not the police. The bank has no obligation to report false clients' accounts to the authorities"?
Perfectly true.
Frustrated with the lack of action, Wilkinson resigned and took his family back to Britain. It would take nearly 5 years for Danske Bank to come up with answers after prodding from the Scandinavian and European press. After reviewing more than 6,000 non-resident accounts, it acknowledged at a news conference last fall that its tiny Estonian branch was the gateway for what may be the largest money laundering case in history.
I'd only scratched the surface. However, it's huge the numbers seemed to me back in 2013, back in 2014. Unbelievably, I'd only just scratched the surface of what was actually going on in the bank.
Do you have any idea what percentage of that money was dirty?
They said that almost all the customers were suspicious.
So far, at least 18 former Danske Bank employees are facing charges in the case, including former CEO Thomas Borgen and his chief financial officer. The bank itself faces 4 counts of violating the Danish Anti-Money Laundering Act.
Danske Bank itself admits to a complete breakdown of every single internal control. This isn't 1 or 2 mistakes. This is a mistake of their entire system over years, of which they profited immensely.
Attorney Stephen Cohn, who has been representing whistleblowers for more than 30 years and is Howard Wilkinson's lawyer, says Danske Bank is not the only one that profited from the scheme. Most of the $230 billion passed through big New York banks undetected for years.
What does that sheer number, $230 billion, tell you?
Well, first off, it's almost impossible to put your hands around. You're dealing with major financial institutions worldwide who are complicit.
When you say complicit, what do you mean?
The moment you're doing money laundering in large amounts of money, billions, hundreds of millions, you need the big banks. And the big banks are under strict regulations. From the Patriot Act, anti-terrorist financing, very strict rules to stop money laundering.
You're saying that they should have known?
Oh, they absolutely should have known.
J.P. Morgan was the first to suspect that Danske Bank was laundering large amounts of Russian money through its Estonian branch, and it broke off its banking relationship in 2013. Deutsche Bank USA and Bank of America carried on into 2015.
The banks aren't talking to us, but I would assume that they'll say, look, it's Danske Bank's job to know who its customers are. Our customer is Danske Bank. We have no reason to know all this money is flowing in to Estonia from Russia. And
Sure, of course. Let's just put it this way. You have to have due diligence. And you have this little bank out there in Estonia pumping in billions of dollars to you. Do you think you should ask? But the proof of the pudding is that J.P. Morgan figured it out. Were they geniuses? And who did they tell? And why didn't they expose the full scheme to the United States? Why was it up to one guy in a bank in Estonia to figure it out and turn it in, risking everything? Why is it always up to the whistleblower?
What's the answer to that question?
The banks have to do their job. And the only way they will be held fully accountable is when the United States and other governments hold them accountable and force them to implement the rules that exist to protect all of us.
all of that is being weighed right now by the U.S. Justice Department and other federal agencies which are investigating Danske Bank. It's cooperating with the investigation, as are J.P. Morgan, Bank of America, and Deutsche Bank USA. None of the banks accepted our request for interviews. The case could end up with hundreds of millions of dollars in fines, and under U.S. whistleblower laws, Howard Wilkinson could potentially share in the proceeds. I mean, you were the whistleblower in this case, correct?
I guess so.
Under U.S. law, you could end up being rewarded with a substantial amount of money.
Back in December 13, the idea that this would be a case that the U.S. Department of Justice and SEC would ever have any interest in would never even cross my mind. You know, the bank should have investigated it, sorted it out. What happened? Basically, nothing. It's shocking.
It's impossible to say exactly where the $230 billion of dirty money originated beyond the banks of Moscow. It's been estimated that about a third of the Russian economy is off the books. Awash in cash, much of it is from corruption, bribes, and tax evasion by oligarchs, plutocrats, and mafiosi. And it's impossible to tell exactly where it's hidden now, beyond the shell companies, tax havens, and expensive real estate in New York and London.
Do you think that there's any chance that we'll ever find out whose money it was and where it ended up?
It's going to be difficult. And the fact that it's so difficult is fully the responsibility of Danske Bank. Think about it walking in the snow. The snow keeps falling and the footprints are covered up. And that's where we are now in 2019. It's certainly not impossible, but it's many, many times harder. A lot of snow has fallen over the footprints.
Dr. Rick Bright is the highest-ranking government scientist to charge the federal government's response to the coronavirus pandemic has been slow and chaotic. He says it has prioritized politics over science and has cost people their lives. It has cost Dr. Bright his job. In April, he was removed from a top position in the Department of Health and Human Services and transferred to what he considers a position of less stature and responsibility. Dr. Bright has filed a whistleblower complaint running over 300 pages. President Trump has called Rick Bright a disgruntled employee. In congressional testimony on Thursday, Bright claimed the government retaliated against him for telling the truth about the depth of the crisis.
Our window of opportunity is closing. If we fail to improve our response now, based on science, I fear the pandemic will get worse and be prolonged.
Until a month ago, Dr. Rick Bright led BARDA, the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, a federal agency to which Congress has handed more than $5 billion to fund vaccine development new antiviral drugs, and badly needed medical supplies. What is BARDA's mission, and how does it fit in the response to a coronavirus like this?
We focus on chemical threats, biological threats such as anthrax, nuclear threats, radiological threats, pandemic influenza, and emerging infectious diseases.
He still speaks in the present tense, but Rick Bright isn't running BARDA anymore. The reasons trace back to the very first days of January, when he heard of a new coronavirus outbreak in Wuhan, China. When did you first realize that this virus might be different, that this was the big one?
Well, having trained my entire life to recognize these outbreaks and recognize viruses, I have a PhD in virology. I knew that all of the signs for a pandemic were present. A novel virus infecting people, causing significant mortality, and spreading. So all the signs were there. It was just a matter of time before that virus then jumped and left China and appeared in other countries.
In early January, when you were concerned about this virus, were other government officials on alert?
I believe my concerns were shared by other scientists in the government, and I believe the NIH was also moving very quickly to start some research and developing a vaccine and starting a clinical trial for an antiviral drug. What struck me, though, was my sense of urgency didn't seem to prevail across all of HHS.
Bright says that lack of urgency started with the boss of his department, Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar. He recalls a meeting Azar chaired on January 23rd to discuss the coronavirus.
I was the only person in the room, however, that said, we're going to need vaccines and diagnostics and drugs. It's going to take a while and we need to get started.
You were the only one to raise that.
Yes.
In your complaint, you said that Secretary Azar was intent on downplaying this catastrophic threat. Why would he do that?
No, I don't know why he would do that.
President Trump was also downplaying the threat. He said this at an event in Michigan on January 30th.
We think we have it very well under control. We have very little problem in this country at this moment, 5.
Remember, the entire leadership was focused on containment. There was a belief that we could contain this virus and keep it out of the United States. Containment doesn't work. Containment does buy time. It could slow, it very well could slow the spread. But while you're slowing the spread, you better be doing something in parallel to be prepared for when that virus breaks out. That was my job.
Bright says he was well equipped to do that job because just 5 months before the new virus emerged, his and other key agencies had concluded an exercise titled Crimson Contagion, premised on the exact idea of a fast-spreading virus originating in China. What did Crimson Contagion teach you about fighting pandemics? What were the lessons?
There were lessons about shortages on critical supplies, such as personal protective equipment, such as masks, N95 masks, gowns, goggles, and there were lessons about the need for funding.
You had practiced this.
We had drilled. We'd practiced. We'd been through Ebola. We'd been through Zika. We'd been through H1N1. This was not a new thing for us. We knew exactly what to do.
Bright says one big lesson from Crimson Contagion was that the entire U.S. medical supply chain would be understocked and under stress for vaccines, testing, and personal protective equipment.
I had industry manufacturers, industry reps, sending me emails almost every day, raising alarm bells that the supply chain was running dry, and that America and the world was in trouble.
Mike Boeing was one of those people. He had been warning Rick Bright and BARDA for years. His small Texas company, Prestige Ameritech, is one of just a few that still makes surgical and N95 masks in the U.S. Over the last 15 years, he says, 90% of the manufacturing has shifted abroad, where masks are cheaper to make. How long have you been telling anyone who would listen that once a pandemic hits, that America would face a big problem?
Since 2007. And for 13 years, we told
We told the story that a pandemic was going to come, the mask supply was going to collapse, and foreign health officials were going to cut off masks to the United States, and that's exactly what happened.
Boeing's factory near Fort Worth had several mass production lines sitting idle. And on January 22nd, he sent Rick Bright an email offering to reactivate those lines, which could produce 7 million masks a month, but said he could only do it with government help. Mike Boeing was offering to ramp up production. He's like, I have the factory. I can make more masks. Did you have the authority to say, yes, let's do it?
I did not in BARDA. I had the authority to push that need up into the right department in the HHS, in our department. And I did so almost daily for a period of time.
In fact, on January 25th, you wrote your colleagues that the mask situation seems to be of concern, and we have been receiving warnings for over a week. How did they respond?
Passively. They responded with a thank you for notification. We'll talk to the manufacturers ourselves and take appropriate action when it's needed.
A day later, on January 26th, Mike Boeing was even more blunt in an email to you, saying this: the U.S. mask supply is at imminent risk. Rick, I think we're in deep
He was exactly right. Mike Boeing saw this coming and was doing everything he could do to get the attention of the U.S. government to get us to act.
Though it took nearly 2 months, the U.S. government finally did act, ordering 500 million masks. A push for that came from Peter Navarro, President Trump's Director of Trade and Manufacturing Policy, who has long been concerned about American industrial production shifting abroad, especially to China. President Bush didn't fix the problem of manufacturing like this going overseas. President Obama didn't, and neither has President Trump. Why is this so hard?
It's actually not hard. It does take a strategy. It does take a commitment. It does take some investment as well. And again, it's not just about masks.
You're telling me we've completely offshored our ability to respond to a pandemic.
We have offshored a lot of our industry for critical supplies, critical healthcare supplies, and critical medicines to save money.
In March, as hospitals were beginning to swell with critically ill COVID-19 patients, the search was on for any and all possible treatments.
Hydroxychloroquine, I don't know. It's looking like it's having some good results. I hope that would be a phenomenal thing.
The president began to tout the potential of a drug combination that he said in a tweet on March 21st had a real chance to be one of the biggest game changers in the history of medicine. Did you ever think that hydroxychloroquine would be a game changer?
No. Never. And the limited data available told us that it could be dangerous. It could have negative side effects, and it could even lead to death.
According to Bright's whistleblower complaint, on March 23rd, Dr. Bright received an urgent directive passed down from the White House to drop everything and make the drug widely available to the American public. What was the reaction of your lead coronavirus scientist when you got this directive? We've got to drop everything.
I believe his expression was at the time that, we've been hit by a bus.
Bright says his team tried to limit access to the drugs to hospital patients only, and he shared his concerns with a reporter. On April 21st, he was reassigned to what he considered a lesser role at the National Institutes of Health. You believe you were retaliated against because you raised concerns about hydroxychloroquine?
Yes, I do. I believe my last-ditch effort to protect Americans from that drug was the final straw that they used and believed was essential to push me out.
HHS firmly disputes that, claiming in a statement that Bright's whistleblower complaint is filled with one-sided arguments and misinformation. And Secretary Alex Azar said it was Bright who made the request for an emergency use authorization, or EUA, for hydroxychloroquine.
Dr. Bright literally signed the application for FDA authorization of it. Literally, he's the sponsor of it.
You say you were retaliated against, but at the same time, you did sign the EUA.
I was given a directive. I didn't have a choice other than to leave at that time. And I went along and signed that letter knowing that we had contained access to that drug. The American healthcare system is being taxed to the limit.
As Rick Bright was testifying before Congress on Thursday, President Trump weighed in.
I'll tell you what, to me, I watched this guy for a little while this morning. To me, he's nothing more than a really disgruntled, unhappy person.
The president called you a disgruntled employee.
I am not disgruntled. I am frustrated at a lack of leadership. I am frustrated at a lack of urgency to get a head start on developing life-saving tools for Americans. I'm frustrated at our inability to be heard as scientists. Those things frustrate me.
Rick Bright knows he won't be barred as director again, but he says he will report to his new position at the NIH by the end of May and hopes to continue to speak out about the coronavirus pandemic.
We don't yet have a national strategy to respond fully to this pandemic. The best scientists that we have in our government who are working really hard to try to figure this out aren't getting that clear, cohesive leadership, strategic plan message yet. And until they get that, it's still going to be chaotic.
Every religion has its mysteries. One of the closest guarded secrets of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints has been its wealth. Tonight, you will hear for the first time about its remarkable size from a former manager at the church's investment firm. David Nielsen says that during his 9 years managing money at the church firm, the value of its investments ballooned past $100 billion. That would make it the largest treasure held by any religious fund in America. But instead of spending that money to do good, David Nielsen alleges it was used in ways that bent the law and broke his faith.
I thought I was going to work for a charity. I thought that's what my skills were going to do, was help build a charity and do good with things. And the funds were never used for that. It was really a clandestine hedge fund.
A clandestine hedge fund?
Yeah.
How so?
Those funds weren't used the way they were appropriated to be used.
So how were they being used?
Well, once the money went in, it didn't go out.
David Nielsen was a senior portfolio manager for the investment arm of the church called Ensign Peak Advisors. In 2009, Nielsen, who says he was a devout Mormon, was recruited away from a lucrative job on Wall Street to work for the firm, a block from church headquarters in Salt Lake City.
You know this, Wall Street, you spend your skills working to make really rich people a little bit more rich, but there is something different about the prospect of putting your skills to work for something that you think is really going to build the kingdom, that's really going to make a difference.
But Nielsen says he grew troubled by what he saw at Ensign Peak. He says the firm used false records and statements to masquerade as a charity, stockpiling money and misleading church members. Every year, the church collects an estimated $7 billion in contributions from its 17 million members. The church expects members to contribute about 10% of their income, a practice known as tithing. Explain how the tithe is supposed to be used.
Tithing is what's used to build buildings. It's what's used to pay the light bills. Tithing is what's used to operate some of the church's programs.
Whatever's left over, about $1 billion a year, is put into a reserve fund at Ensign Peak and invested. Because Ensign Peak is registered as a nonprofit, it all grows tax-free. David Nielsen says since it was created in 1997, the reserve fund has swelled beyond $100 billion, twice the size of Harvard's endowment or the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
could solve big problems with $100 billion.
And is that the thing that bothers you about all this?
I thought we were going to change the world. And we just grew the bank account.
Did any of your former bosses explain how the money was going to be used one day?
The answer was always the second coming. And it's a bit tongue-in-cheek. But deep down, I think a lot of the employees really did believe that.
Publicly, church leaders called it a rainy day fund. But in 2013, Nielsen says one of his bosses shared this document at a meeting that showed $1.4 billion from the fund went to a mall being built on land owned by the church. And $600 million was used to prop up a for-profit church-owned insurance company called Beneficial Life.
Look, I'm not an expert on charities, but I've been around the block enough to know that charitable organizations can't bail out for-profit businesses and maintain their charitable status.
And so when they gave this money to bail out a for-profit venture, what was your reaction?
What are we doing? Like, how is this okay?
David Nielsen says he hit his breaking point in 2018 after a website called Mormon Leaks linked church members to companies that existed only on paper. Those shell companies held billions of dollars in stocks and bonds. What nobody knew outside church leadership was those assets were actually controlled by Ensign Peak. Nielsen says the firm called an emergency meeting. What was the explanation?
These entities were to hide the assets from the members. The chief investment officer said that if we were to change and start reporting these securities in our own name, it would bring undue attention to the firm, and that attention would be potentially damaging. And after the meeting, I went and confronted him. What do you mean, potentially damaging? And he said, Dave, we're going to lose our tax-exempt status. I knew in that moment that I was in the wrong place.
He resigned in 2019 and filed a 74-page whistleblower complaint with the Internal Revenue Service, alleging that Ensign Peak violated its tax-exempt status by moving money to for-profit businesses.
It's not just incorrect, it's flat out wrong.
Christopher Waddell says David Nielsen didn't have a full picture of Ensign Peak. Waddell is one of 3 church bishops who oversees finances.
As a Christian church, we believe that someday Jesus Christ will return, but that's not why we have those resources. It's for the continuing operation and for the future.
David Nielsen alleged that Ensign Peak violated its tax-exempt status by directing money to church businesses. How would you characterize how that money was used?
The church actually owned Beneficial Life, and fortunately, the church had the resources to bail out Beneficial Life during the financial crisis, 2008, 2009.
In the mall?
The mall was not a bailout. The mall was an investment.
And you are receiving returns on that
absolutely.
investment?
Yeah, it was an investment.
Waddell says the insurance company has paid back most of the bailout money, but the church would not disclose the details of that deal or the mall investment. Unlike other nonprofits, religious organizations don't have to fully disclose all financial information to the IRS. What is the value right now of Ensign Peak's assets?
Yeah, that's something I can't share with you right now. I know there've been reports on approximates and that kind of thing, and that's as far as we can go right now.
It's been estimated at $150 billion. Does that sound correct?
That's an estimate that some have made.
Are we in the ballpark or no?
We have significant resources.
Give us a sense of what percentage is going out the door of the money under management.
To be honest, we've never looked at it as a percentage. We looked at it based on needs to make sure that we're comfortable with how many years' worth we have in case of financial difficulties, in case of financial crisis, to make sure that we can continue church operations. We just want to make sure that is sufficient.
David Nielsen says he did not intend for his complaint to the IRS to become public, but in 2019, his brother shared it with the Washington Post. Nielsen, who in his free time races motorcycles, says he was shunned by some of his friends and neighbors in Salt Lake City. It wasn't until 2021, 2 years later, that David Nielsen heard from investigators. Not from the IRS, but the Securities and Exchange Commission, which launched its own probe into Ensign Peak after that website story linked the church to shell companies.
What information did you give to the SEC?
Everything. I helped them see the big picture.
To protect market fairness and transparency, any firm with more than $100 million in securities must file accurate reports on its holdings with the SEC. But in February, the SEC announced the Church of Latter-day Saints and Ensign Peak failed to do that. SEC investigators found the church went to great lengths to hide $32 billion in securities over nearly 20 years. It created 13 shell companies that were assigned a local phone number that would go directly to voicemail in case regulators checked in.
Here they had these back office accountants who had never bought a bond or sold a stock a day in their life, signing signatory pages for a portfolio that didn't exist.
The SEC fined the church and Ensign Peak a total of $5 million. Bishop Christopher Waddell told us it was the church's lawyers who advised them to create the shell companies.
What about, the idea that secrecy builds mistrust?
Mm-hmm. Well, we don't feel it's being secret. We feel it's being confidential.
What's the difference?
The difference is, I guess it's a point of view. It's confidential in order to maintain the focus on what our purpose is and what the mission of the church is, rather than the church has X amount of money.
But don't you agree this would be a non-issue if there was more transparency?
No, because then everyone would be telling us what they wanted us to do with the money.
Last year, the church says it spent over $1 billion on humanitarian aid, including food production.
In any given month, you may have an average of 9 transfers that going from Ensign Peak back to the church to fund all church operations, all humanitarian work, education work, all the work of the church, they fund.
Money's going in and out of the cash accounts all the time. But Ensign Peak's funds were never used for any charitable purpose. It's, to my knowledge, the whole time I was there. So there's a bit of a distinction here that's important.
Explain that to me.
Well, it's the difference between your checking account and maybe your retirement account. They're used for different purposes, and you don't get to pretend that one is affecting the other.
The fundamental claim to me is that Ensign Peak brings money in, and it's the Hotel California. It never comes out.
Phil Hackney worked in the Office of Chief Counsel of the IRS and teaches tax law. He concedes it's complex, and the case falls into a gray area.
The church would say, we give millions of dollars out every year in humanitarian work. How much is enough by the standards of the IRS?
We know within private foundations, it's 5% of assets. There's no clarity when it comes to public charities, and certainly not with churches. But I would expect to see something like 2-3% of assets being spent out to justify that status.
But how do you know if they're spending 2 or 3% of assets if we don't know what the assets are?
We have to rely on them behaving well.
They said they bailed out this insurance company. That's the words they used. Is that a problem?
It is a problem, in my opinion, if they have moved money from the nonprofit to a for-profit.
So how likely do you think it would be that the IRS would ever investigate this?
Slim. The political risk is so great that it comes with real danger. At the same time, there's a real risk to the rule of law if the IRS doesn't come in and enforce those rules.
David Nielsen says honesty is a tenet of the faith. He wants Ensign Peak advisors to pay the taxes he says it owes on the $100 billion fortune built from tithing. If the IRS decides Nielsen is right, he could be rewarded with up to 30% of what's collected. The IRS does not comment on whistleblower complaints.
Why are you speaking now?
It's time, Sharon. We gave the IRS and the SEC all the professional courtesy. This is just too important to fall through the cracks.
It's possible that you were dead wrong?
No. I know what I saw. I know what I know.
On Thursday night, Hurricane Helene and its 140-mile-an-hour winds made landfall in Florida's Big Bend region. It was deadly. The full extent of the damage won't be known for weeks, and residents know rebuilding after the storm is likely to be as daunting as the storm itself. It's been 2 years since Hurricane Ian hit southwest Florida, and an estimated 50,000 homeowners are still locked in battles with their insurance companies. Tonight, you will hear from insurance insiders who say after years of diligently paying premiums, homeowners are being misled by their insurance carriers. The Whistleblowers, who are all licensed adjusters, tell us after Hurricane Ian, several insurance carriers were using altered damage reports to deceive customers. As Hurricane Ian slammed into Florida with 150-mile-an-hour winds, Jeff Rapkin took this video from the porch of his home, about 40 miles south of Sarasota.
All the trees are coming down. They don't normally look like this. Everything's coming apart. My name is Jeff Rapkin. I live in Northport, Florida.
Rapkin, an adoption attorney, and his wife Ginny raised 3 children in this home and weathered more than a half dozen hurricanes inside it. But Ian, they say, was different.
It sat above our heads. It wouldn't move. I mean, it was a nightmare.
And it went on for how long?
11 hours.
11 hours.
It felt like the hurricane was inside the house. We couldn't keep the windows closed.
That is the Rapkins' house. A neighbor just happened to be filming when their steel roof was ripped off. When the storm finally passed, the Rapkins could see clear skies through the new hole Hurricane Ian punched in their ceiling. There were trees on and around their house. The roof was shredded, and everything inside was soaked. The Rapkins lined up their losses on the curb and called their insurance company, Heritage, to begin the claims process. It sent a licensed adjuster to the house to assess the damage. Did you get the feeling, speaking to him and showing him around the property, that he understood what was happening here, that this was serious?
He was really nice. He was thorough, and he said, your house is probably going to need to be completely rebuilt.
Which is why the Rapkins were floored when they finally got a check from their insurance company 3 months later.
They sent us a report from the adjuster which said that it would cost $15,000 to put our home back to pre-hurricane conditions.
They sent you $15,000?
$15,000, and so the deductible was taken out, so it was $10,000, and then our public adjuster took $1,000 out, so we had $9,000.
When you called and said, $9,000, are you kidding me? What was the reaction?
The reaction was, this is the decision we've made, and I started to pray for Mr. Jordan Lee's untimely demise because I was so angry.
We found Mr. Jordan Lee very much alive.
Do you remember the Rapkin family?
Yes, ma'am.
Lee is the adjuster who went to the Rapkins' home after the storm.
What do you remember about them?
Their property, a 2-story home, metal roof that was blown off by Hurricane Ian, and the interior of the home was it was soaked.
Jordan Lee has been a licensed adjuster in Florida since 2017. After major disasters, most insurance companies use third-party firms who hire adjusters like Lee to help them with the thousands of claims. Lee says after he assesses a home, he always leaves his cell phone number with the homeowners so they can call him if they have any questions. After Hurricane Ian, homeowners did.
What were they saying?
Cussing me out left and right, up and down. You know, how could you do this to us? It was really bad, actually. And out of the thousands of claims that I've handled, I've never had phone calls like that.
Confused, he went back to compare the damage report he wrote for the Rapkins to the one the insurance company sent to them.
That's your work.
Correct.
And this is what they were given.
Totally different. Totally different.
You said they needed a new roof.
I did.
And this report says what?
It reads as a repair.
Was that roof able to be repaired, in your opinion?
Not in my opinion, no.
Later, Jordan Lee learned a desk adjuster who'd never been to the Rapkins' home, had deleted entire sections of his report, but left his name and his license number on it, making it look like his work.
Did anybody ever alert you, hey, we're making a change to this report?
No, nobody told me. The only way that I knew was the homeowner calling me.
It is standard procedure for field adjusters to collaborate with those back in the office to make minor edits. But Jordan Lee says that is not what happened with the Rapkins report.
Did you put a dollar amount on how much you thought they were owed?
$231,368.57.
What did the insurance carrier come up with?
$15,469.48. So quite a bit of difference.
That's not a difference of opinion.
No.
Jordan Lee says as he dug further into his work from Hurricane Ian, he was stunned to discover the Rapkins weren't the only family whose report was altered.
It was basically all of them. I mean, I handled 46 of them, 44 of them were changed.
Were any of your reports changed to give the policy owner more money?
No.
It was always down.
It was always down.
Down by as much as 98%. One estimate he wrote for $488,000 was changed to $13,000. Another from $239,000 to $3,000. On December 13th, 2022,
My name is Jordan Lee. I'm an independent insurance adjuster, and I work for the insurance companies.
Jordan Lee and two other adjusters testified to Florida lawmakers about what one watchdog group called systematic criminal fraud by the insurance companies.
The scheme was repeated over and over again, not only on my estimates, but on estimates written by other adjusters.
Ben Mandel has been a licensed adjuster since 2017. He did not work for Heritage, but says 18 of the 20 reports he wrote for another carrier after Hurricane Ian were altered. And he says he and other adjusters were instructed by some of their managers to leave damage off reports.
And there was a deliberate scheme to do this. And it wasn't just with one carrier doing this. This was 6 carriers that we discovered were doing this in the state of Florida. They all got the memo.
Which was?
Which was, we're not going to replace roofs, asphalt shingle roofs. We're not going to replace them. We're going to repair them.
Mandel says he refused to leave off roofs.
They were asking me to do something that was illegal.
And why was it illegal?
It's illegal because when I go out to make a damage estimate, I have to put what the damage is, not what they want the damage to be. And so if I leave something off that's supposed to be on there, I can be prosecuted for that.
So the company's telling you, leave the roofs off, we're not paying for roofs, but you keep writing these
That's
roofs need
correct.
replaced.
I wrote the way they're supposed to be.
And you get fired.
And I got fired.
Now, Ben Mandel and 5 other whistleblower adjusters are represented by attorney Stephen Bush. Bush worked as a public adjuster for more than a decade.
What the carriers are doing, in some instances, what they've said was if the policyholder needs a new roof, then we're going to make them make us pay. In other words, file a lawsuit, and then we'll pay you for your roof.
But unless they do that, they're not getting the roof paid for?
They're not getting it. They're not getting it. Most people will not stand up and fight. I cannot tell you how many people come to me and say, hey, what was I going to do? I had to replace my roof.
And do you think the insurance companies know that? They're betting on that most people are just going to roll over?
No question they know that. They're playing the odds, and they're winning.
Florida's insurance market has been a risky gamble for years. After a decade of costly storms, several national carriers exited Florida. Smaller regional carriers stepped in, but not all were up to the job. Since 2021, at least 9 insurance companies in Florida have collapsed. And some of the remaining ones, Stephen Bush says, altered damage reports.
And is it just in Florida?
I now have evidence in 6 different states of where carriers are manipulating the estimates, changing them, and then misrepresenting to policyholders that it's the work product of the field adjuster.
And do most times the policy owner have any idea?
Policyholder has no clue.
Yeah, there's almost no transparency in the claims process.
Doug Quinn is the executive director of the American Policyholders Association, an advocacy group he started after his home was destroyed by Hurricane Sandy in 2012.
The victims of insurer fraud are the last people to find out that they were victims of insurer fraud.
So when the insurance carriers say, look, it's our right, we're allowed to go back in there and do what we want to these adjuster reports, you would say,
you're not allowed to take somebody who has dutifully paid premiums for years, and when they need their insurance, cheat them and shave 70, 80, or 90% off their claim. You're not allowed to do that. You are allowed to disagree with, the minutia, but coming in to that degree and faking the facts on a claim is not acceptable, and there should be legal consequences for that.
If you really want to see change in the industry, put somebody in handcuffs.
Attorney Stephen Bush says he turned over what he says is evidence of insurer fraud to state investigators, and Florida opened a criminal investigation. But 2 years after the storm, Florida's made no arrests.
we know fraud's investigated all the time when it comes to homeowners, right? That if you put in a false
contractors and public adjusters, everybody who's aligned with the consumer who cost the insurance industry money. Those cases get investigated and prosecuted rather quickly and aggressively. All we are asking is that cases that are alleged to be perpetrated by the insurance carriers or the vendors that they hire are just as aggressively investigated and prosecuted when fraud is found.
Quinn says it's difficult to know how many policyholders may have been given less money than they were owed. But 2 years after the storm, every unrepaired home and tarp tells a story. At the Rafkins, mold and Mother Nature are gnawing away at what's left of their home. And upstairs...
Oh, thanks. All right. Oh, well, there's the sky. This isn't a hole. This is a crack down the middle of your house. I can put my whole arm up through here.
That split roof is an open wound for the Rafkins, who still have to mow the lawn and make mortgage payments on their rotting home every month. They're also paying rent on an apartment nearby and $4,000 a year to Heritage for home insurance.
And you're still paying?
I'm still paying.
Oh, yeah.
The premiums went up. So we're still paying and the premiums went up. And I can't get another insurance company, obviously.
Jeff and Ginny Rapkin filed a lawsuit against Heritage, accusing it of breach of contract and fraud. In a statement to 60 Minutes, Heritage said it couldn't comment on specific policyholders, but aims to pay every eligible claim and had no intention to deceive. The company says in its own random sample, about 42% of damage reports were revised downward and 26% were revised upward. Heritage says that since Hurricane Ian, it has made many reforms, including updating its claims processing software, which it blames for not including the names of desk adjusters who altered reports.
Do you think that was a mistake, just an innocent mistake?
Originally I did. I said, oh, maybe they made an error.
And what do you think now?
I think they did it on purpose, and I think people are getting letters that say they're not covered when they are. This is a con. That's what this is. This is make them go away at all costs. We're not paying.